today. How about that? Okay. Hey folks. Happy Tuesday. My bad. I'm not trying to be 15 minutes late. I had to push things back because listen, I don't like doing lives on days where I have to be at the office because then I'm, racing against time and fighting all of the things like traffic and train delays, and then you're still trying to get your dinner and everything else. But you know what? We're here. We shall make this work. All right. So I'll get in a few quick hellos and then real talk. I don't have a lot of topics tonight. It's mainly me in my 2 cents on Kevin Hart and his foolery. And then really we're about to hone in on all of this conversation about voting rights and just what's been happening with all the different states, just because there's been so much to happen literally daily. And then, depending on what our time looks like, we'll try to bring in some other stuff and try to end on a happy note. But just some updates as to where I have been, because if you don't see me, it's because I'm probably doing something, right? But let me do some hellos really quick. What up, K Inspired? Shout out to you. K Inspired be supporting my music, so I appreciate it. Right, I be seeing the posts every now and then, so thank you for that. Hello, Tina. She said she finally caught a live. What up, Poison Ivy? What up, Balto Nav? Alan, hello. Crazy Homebody Girl. Course correction. What is that? CTA Demi 2. Sorry, I don't got my glasses and I never wear them anyway. Let's see. Crescenta 3528. Hello. But okay, let me go ahead and get to some quick story times and get into the actual topics. So hopefully you all had a great Mother's Day. I had a decent one, but I had to do my Mother's Day a week early because this past Mother's Day, one of my kids was graduating from college. They went to VCU's School of Business, and they asked me in February if I could come to their graduation. And so I'm like, yeah, I'll be there, sure. And I done locked everything in. And then as it got closer, I realized her graduation was on Mother's Day. So I ended up visiting my mother a week early, which was still nice because went to Atlanta. I got an opportunity, of course, to see the rest of my family. So like my cousin Brandon and one of my aunts and my cousins. And it was really nice. Brandon's kids are all athletes, right? And the daughters that he have, they can play the heck out of some softball. And so we went to his daughter Bella's game. When I tell you they tore them kids up so bad, I was feeling bad for the team that lost. Because the way that they play, if a team scores 25, the game just has to stop because at that point it's bullying. Them girls won 25-6. Like them, man, but it was fun. It was cool to kind of see all the kids run around. And what was so funny too, actually probably wasn't funny. The parents get real intense at these games. Like it gets to the point where you almost gotta be a referee up in there because the parents be ready to square up in the parking lot after these games. But it was a good time. It was really great to see family. And then of course, you pull out that spades, it's on and popping. I'm not really a spades player like that. So I like to just watch and instigate and talk trash. But my cousin Brandon and Tiffany, the two of them were on the team versus my mom. And actually, our next door neighbors that used to live by us when we lived in Washington State just happened to be in town too. So it was my mom and the lady, Miss Cynthia, versus my cousin Brandon and Tiffany. And if you remember my stories from childhood, I never liked playing any games with my cousin Tiffany or sometimes Brandon because I was the youngest one. It was only 3 grandkids. And Tiffany was 8 years older than me. And then Brandon was 2 years older than me. So a lot of times when we used to play like Monopoly, I would be 6 years old. Brandon was 8 and Tiffany would be like 14. So of course, because she's, probably in 9th grade, Tiffany is excellent at math. I'm still just barely getting the reading part down. And Tiffany and Brandon would have all kind of alliances and all kind of stuff that's not even in Monopoly. Like they'd have alliances. There was immunity. There was insurance. There were a few other things. And it was to the point where Tiffany would make up her own rules where she would have the houses and the hotels, even on the railroad properties, right? And what Tiffany would do, so mind you, I'm like 6. I'm playing the game crying because, I don't got no property. Or I might have a property or two, but I don't got no monopoly on nothing. So, they land on my Baltic Avenue and they give me $4 or $5. But, it's like everywhere on the board I go, Tiffany owns the whole board and she won't let you just lose. So you would land on whatever property with these new rules that she's made. Like one time I landed on the jail, just visiting. You're supposed to just scoop on by and keep it moving. I somehow owed her money. And what she would do is you might only have like $90 left, but you owe her $1,000 or $1,326. She would take everything you have except that $1 so you could stay in the game with the hopes that you could make it past go and get that next 200. But there were no safe spaces on the board. So anyway, I say all that to say, it was a little PTSD with them playing, but I enjoyed watching them lose. Sorry, Brandon. Sorry, Tiffany. Love y'all. But so no, that was a lot of fun. At the same time, if you follow me on social media, one of the things that I've been kind of doing, I didn't really post a lot about it, but my co-creative music visual partner, Jersey, one of the things that he's been doing with Zap Entertainment is that the group Mindless Behavior, for those who are too old to even know who they are, because honestly, if I didn't work with kids, I wouldn't have been as familiar. But anyway, Mindless Behavior was this boy band that blew up, I want to say in like 2012-ish, maybe 2011, right? Early 2010s. They had a run, boy band, 4 members. They split over the years, but 2 of them have reunited, Ray and Prodigy, and they've been going around the country teaching the choreography from their music videos at all these different dance studios in different cities. And so I was on the logistics for like the DC and the Richmond date, which was kind of cool because you get to kind of see just that side of the industry and everything like that. It was funny when we got to Richmond because we were a little late. And when we pulled up to the dance studio, you have this line of women that are all probably between 18 and maybe 25, right? Because 10 years ago, this would have been the time period when Mindless Behavior they were crazy over them. So, they're reliving their childhood dreams and stuff. So it's all these women lined up around the block, right? And then we're in 2 different vehicles because you got the vehicle, because they got drivers too, right? And drivers and security. So, we're in the vehicles and somehow we were late, but I was in the vehicle that got there first. But all the people in my vehicle were all like press people or like logistics and stuff. And so I just remember we pulled up and you can see all the women pulling out their phones, ready. And I'm like, damn, I gotta open this door and they're gonna realize I am not Ray or Prodigy. And so like as soon as I opened the door, all them girls that had to who is that? That ain't even them. Y'all, they got me effed up. And so it's like all of them were like side-eyeing me. Mind you, I'm like, I'm gonna be the reason all y'all can get in, relax. But no, it was really cool. And one of the coolest bits is one of my old kids. I don't remember what her name is in the podcast, but I don't want to use her real name on here. But anyway, she was obsessed with this group when I used to run the center. So back when she was maybe 9 or 10, she and some of the other kids, they used to push the tables out the way and put the music videos on the big screen, and they would be doing the Mrs. Right choreography or the what other songs did they had, like Girls Talking About, those kind of songs, and they would be doing all the choreography. So she actually went to the DC session, and so it's kind of cool to see it all full circle. I've been looking for this video I have of her from, I want to say 2012, of her and some of her friends doing the choreography, and I kind of want to make a whole collage and be like a then versus now. So that was that. What else? I'm almost done, y'all. My rant, I gotta get it all out. Yeah, I mean, those are all the main things. So that was pretty cool. And, they did the meet and greets, which were even bigger. It's like 400 or 500 people in both cities. And Ray and Prodigy were actually really nice enough to stop and talk and entertain each person that signed up for a meet and greet. So people got their pictures and autographs. And then after that, you still got an after party. So I've been kind of all over the place watching the world fall apart and anxious to get back to you guys so we could talk some business. You know what I mean? So much going on. And I believe actually they are still doing this tour. If you're in LA, I know they're there on May 16th. I think they are, I want to say Mississippi. I don't know if they've already done you guys yet. Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. I think y'all got some dates coming up. They got some stuff in Jersey again. They're going to kind of circle back to a few cities. So, yeah, it's, they got a bunch of stuff going. So there's that. Book club will pick up. I'm going to let you guys enjoy the rest of your May and most of your June, and we're going to pick up sometime around June. But you all can actually start sending in your suggestions of books you may want to have us vote on for the book club. And then, like I said, the book club right now, I have it written down as June 25th, but I actually think I want to say that's Memorial Day, and that's when everybody's traveling and on. Hopefully, y'all are not on cruises. But so I'm gonna push back a little bit, maybe like 2 more weeks, because I don't want to go into the 4th of July weekend either. So we'll figure it out. Anyway, enough on all that. Let me get to Kevin Hart. All right, Kevin. So let me do this. Now, if I'm looking over here, it's because I got my other notes. So Kevin Hart, mind you, this was what, Sunday? I'm literally walking in the door after I've just driven back and forth to Richmond for the VCU graduation, all in the same day. I'm already tired. But anyway, I keep seeing all the stuff trending about this roast. And then, so we end up watching the roast. And what's interesting? I've seen many roasts, I've seen many comedy bits, but it's always interesting. For some reason, whenever there is a roast that involves black people on the receiving end and it's at the hands of white comedians, you ever notice it's like they unload the clip on all of the most extreme racist things that they can say. Like this is their moment to just get out all of the black, darky, cotton picking, slavery, crack, ghetto, your dad's not in the home, that's when they just unload it all. And sometimes the jokes don't even fit with anything. It's like they've just been waiting to get some of that stuff out. And so, true story, because I'm trying to give people time to get on here, because to be fair, I did not post the thing early enough for a lot of people to know. So I'm trying to give people time. I remember, and I love this conversation because technically I am a comedian. That's technically how this channel started. But I remember I was doing a show at Tacoma Underground when I was in my early 20s. And I don't remember if this was an open mic night or if this was a feature. But anyway, normally when you do these comedy shows, and now mind you, I'm speaking very humble beginnings comedy. This is when I was really first starting in comedy, getting my feet wet. I remember I was at Tacoma Underground, and it's me, and sometimes you will speak and kind of connect with some of the other comedians and stuff, right? Because everybody's trying to get to know each other, you're trying to network. And then mind you, at the time we're in Washington State. This is not a big comedy town. Your only options for getting on stage at that point were like Tacoma Underground, when Nate Jackson was doing the Nate Jackson super funny comedy thing in downtown, and like a few spots in Seattle. Anyway, so I'm talking to this white comedian, and we're just exchanging, okay, I just started this many years ago, I'm doing this, or actually I just moved from DC, I'm here for a little bit while I figure out my life and everything. Great conversation this whole time. We wish each other luck. I do my set, and then I'm like, I'll be nice and stay for his, because sometimes you might be doing one or more than one show on the same day, so you might get off your set and then go to something else. So anyway, I've done my set, and then I go and I sit to hear this man's set. As soon as this white man started, every joke was some kind of black chicken, fried grease, and watermelon with what else? With black and mild and clove jokes. And mind you, they weren't even funny. It wasn't even good. And I'm sitting here like, now you just sat in my face for the last 10, 15 minutes. We've had all these conversations, and then this is what comes out. And then you weren't even funny at that. Like, it's to the point where folks aren't even funny, but they feel that they got a pass to do all the other crazy stuff, and it gives them a pass to just do whatever. So it just reminded me of that. But anyway, going to my point, because let me get to where I'm really going with this. And by the way, white folks, I don't need your opinion on none of this conversation, because this is not your conversation to lead. And most of you who are going to come in here and say it was just jokes and so on and so forth, y'all also said that about all Trump's antics, and look where we're at now. And that also includes people from the community who are going to be like, you're doing too much, it ain't that deep. Yes, y'all are also some of the same ones who said Project 2025 wasn't that deep either. I was fear-mongering, and look at us now. So I'm going to say how I feel, and it is going to be what it is. So anyway, the devil does not even need an advocate today. So I'm watching this roast, and they got all these different celebrities. I didn't see the whole thing. I caught some of Chelsea Handler when she did her piece, and some of the other people. Anyway, they get to this guy, Shane Gillis, and Tony Hinchcliffe. By the way, I'm also tired of people finding their way into my knowledge. I'm sorry, let me say this the right way. I'm gonna mess this up. I'm tired of people finding their way into my acknowledgement of existence. Meaning, I was living life, I was great, and then somehow I found out you existed, right? That was my opinion on the Tony guy and the Shane, what's his face. So anyway, Shane has done, I missed Shane's set, but I did notice that Chelsea Handler was dragging him and kept calling him racist. So I'm like, okay, he must just be some terrible person. So anyway, they get to Tony, what is this man's name? Hinchcliffe. Now, I thought I had never heard of this man before, but I realized I did a little bit later. I'll get to that in a second. Tony goes up, he does his set. His whole set, of course, is black this, darky that, and Aunt Janima this, ghetto woman this, neck roll this, all of the things that white comedians love to say when it's time to magically all of a sudden make black people the center of their existence when it comes to comedy. But then there's one portion, now, and mind you, to me, it wasn't, most of it, almost all of it wasn't, to me, it just wasn't landing. Maybe I'm just too far into how I see the world now to enjoy a moment like that, but I'll get to that in a second. But anyway, so then he has this quote. I was going to play it, but I don't want to give Netflix any money. So he has a line, and again, this is about Kevin Hart, and he says, the black community is proud of you. Right now, George Floyd is looking up at us all laughing so hard, he can't breathe. And so me and my friend were watching that, and we're like, how did we get here? You know, it was already, you already on really, really not even thin ice. Like the ice was transparent and all it takes is a flick for everything to crack. That's where Tony was with me at that point. And so by the time he gets to this George Floyd joke, because I knew if you were watching, you knew that at some point it was only going to get worse just based on what he had already said. Because I'm like, okay, this is a man that lives and abides by exactly what it is that he's saying. And so the reality is about this George Floyd joke, because a lot of people are like, oh, it's just jokes, blah, 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 blah. Here's the reality. Tony has had that joke on deck waiting in the wings. Kevin Hart just happened to be the vessel for him to launch it. That has been something he's been waiting for, you know, as far as an opportunity to drop. He just couldn't find the right moment. So, of course, here's the roasting of the black guy. That's the comedian. Perfect. Now I can insert this racist black joke about a black man who was murdered in front of the world. I can squeeze in my jokes because, again, it's all just comedy, right? And so the reality is, like I said, whether it was a Kevin Hart roast or not, that joke eventually was going to show up. It just happened to find this opportunity, and it was at this Kevin Hart roast. And my question always becomes, is like, how does George Floyd get in this? Because if it's one thing, white folks love to use George Floyd as a trigger, right? They love it because they remember the response to his murder. They remember the outrage and the protest. And so they somehow think that bringing up George Floyd all the time is going to be something that is going to rile us up. When in reality, most of the time, most of us are just like, at this point, we know the kind of folks that y'all are. So we're like, all right, we're annoyed that you keep pushing the same button. We're annoyed that the bag of tricks you have, they're just not landing. They're getting a little redundant. And that's what happens when you're already just not really an innovative person or creative to begin with. Like to be honest, a lot of y'all suck at frying up people are trying to roast folks. So it's just like, you're already not good at it. So of course, the racist element seems to be the one thing that many of you seem to thrive in, seem that you just excel, right? Got an A+ in. And so where the smoke is for me, because my smoke ain't even for Tony. I like once I started seeing Tony's jokes, I knew what time it was. So I'm like, yeah, whatever. My smoke was sitting there watching, and for every crackhead, ghetto, hood rat, pickaninny, black tar baby, every racist thing you could hear them say, Kevin is sitting right there. I mean, slapping his lip, having a time. I said, this ain't even just a chuckle funny. This is funny. Oh, things are funny today. Okay. All right. Okay. And so it just makes me also question because one, why was Tony there? Like, actually, let me put up a picture of Tony so I can just give you guys some better context of the kind of person that we're dealing with here. Yeah, let's do that. That way my story here can land a little bit better. All right, let's bring Tony up. So again, my question becomes, why was he there? Now, if you remember this image, we did a video about this day. This is when I realized I knew who Tony was. Just as we were getting closer to the election of 2024, remember that big rally they had at Madison Square Garden? And it was kind of like a Nazi thing with all the hatred and just horrible things that were being said. Tony was there. This is that speech where Tony was saying Puerto Rico was an island of floating garbage and some other stuff like that. And so as I'm doing my little research on Tony, I'm thinking, Kevin, this is one of your friends? This is one of your people? Is this one of the people you call on when you hit hard times or when you need advice about life? Or is this who you would have to take your kids to the baseball game or something or mentor? I don't know. But my question becomes, yeah, so this is your friend, huh? All right. And it's the same thing for the Shane, whatever the other guy's name is. It's like I'm taking note of the kind of company that these folks keep. And what I find even more interesting is Kevin Hart had more smoke for Cat Williams than he did for anything Tony said. Now, mind you, when they did this roast, all the comedians go up there, they roast the people that are sitting there, and they also roast Kevin. And then the next comedian goes, and sometimes they'll respond to what was said, and they'll roast and pass it around. And it just moves around, and it moves around, right? It's all in laughs and so on and so forth. But I did notice this. When Cat Williams showed up, you know, the two of them have never really been buddy-buddy. They've kind of been at each other's throats for a minute, right? So Cat Williams does his bit, pretty much drags everybody in there, talks about integrity, people selling their souls, all that kind of stuff. When Kevin finally gets the mic after everybody has gone, Kevin Hart spends a good minute on Cat Williams. I mean, Cat Williams got about 7 minutes out of Kevin Hart. He went down the line of all the things he needed to say to Cat Williams. So I'm thinking, oh, well, man, I can't wait till he gets to Tony. Then he got to Tony. I don't even remember what was said because I don't remember there being a whole lot that was ever even brought up. And so again, the reality is this. Folks are going to come on here and say, it's a roast. That's how it's supposed to go. You don't get, okay, like I said, y'all keep giving inches of nonsense, and that's why we're in the nonsense we're in right now. But anyway, to that point, understand the difference with this is that, one, a lot of what Tony had to say, and same for the Shane, whatever his face was, it was not rooted in comedy. It was rooted in exactly how they actually feel about you as Black people, right? Straight up hate with the hopes that people will laugh because of what they said was just that offensive. That was literally how they move. Like, where you say something so vile that the shock that it brings to people is what ends up making the people laugh, because they're like, I can't believe you just said that. But when you notice, again, Tony's entire set, if you take away the idea that, oh, this is supposed to be a comedy set or a roast, and you just have somebody repeat those same words, it sounds like everything you hear from the Steve Bannons and Donald Trumps and the who's the one with the big giant huge head, Stephen Miller. They all sound the same, right? It sounds like all the kind of commentary any Black content creator gets by white folks who don't like what it is that they have to say in their comment section. It sounds like all of that. But somehow, because it's a roast, we're going to blanket statement and make the roast almost like a kryptonite term to assume that anything goes. And let me stick with my notes. I'm trying to not go off in circles because I had a lot that I wrote down. But the reality is, like I said, what makes Tony's bit for me different from everything else is that, like I said, Tony subscribes to and abides by everything that he said. I mean, here we are right here. This is somebody who abides to and subscribes to the very people that are fighting to disenfranchise Black people by any means necessary. He actively supports white nationalists, right? He actively supports the people in power who work to oppress Black people. He means everything and every bit that he said on that stage. And so while Kevin was sitting there laughing, thinking it's all jokes, I'm like, fool, this man means this crap. This is legit. And also, because, again, some folks say it's just jokes, and, fair enough if you want to say it that way. But my question becomes, but in this era in time, with everything that's happening, is this really the hill y'all want to die on as far as defending the idea of comedy or jokes, right? With everything happening, where right now Black people are the targets of the federal government, right? The federal government is literally after us every day, whether it's through punitive laws, injustice, right? It through disenfranchisement. We're seeing everything that's happening at the state levels. We're seeing what's happening with the executive orders alone that took place in the first hour of the president being reelected and inaugurated in January of 2026. Who was the target? Us, right? You now live in this space where even as Black people right now who may be trying to land a new job or switch career paths or anything else like that, companies aren't even hiring us, not because we're unqualified, not because we've done anything wrong, but the fear of the fact that some of these companies are afraid that if they hire a Black person, they feel that they're violating some kind of anti-DEI law. So you have companies literally avoiding Black folks because they're afraid of being labeled a DEI something and that they're in violation and that the administration may come down on them. That's where we're at right now. And so my question becomes, again, in this moment, this is who you wanted the platform, because we can also go a little bit deeper here, right? Now, we know Netflix had their say in this show, but there are some other bits in this conversation as well. Kevin Hart had a clause in there where there was no conversations to be allowed about his children. No conversation about his infidelity when he stepped out on the wife and then that video leaked, right? That was off limits. But George Floyd was fine. That tells me everything I need to know, Kevin. George Floyd isn't where you draw the line, but your infidelity is, right? Your children, and I get it. As a parent, I don't want anybody talking about my kids either. But the thing is, the racism is fine because you feel that you may be exempt from the target or what is being stated or what is being said, and it may not have personally affected you. But again, in this era with everything happening, people are going to remember what it was you stood for and where you sat in these moments, right? Because I'm in this era in life where it's like, be about something or be about my way, right? You either be about something or be about the way. Because right now, I don't have time for lukewarm. I'm still trying to be friends with everybody. We got to keep our oppressors comfortable because we don't want to look like we're too emotional or we're too, offended or we're too much of an extremity. I'm not in that space. I'm not there. I'm absolutely not there. And so the other question becomes, like, when you're locked in that room with a bunch of people who have no integrity and no cameras are on you, how is it that you move? And for Kevin Hart, In this instance, the cameras were on you and we saw exactly how you move. And so that just again tells me everything I need to know. I'm just letting you guys know this is the very, very reserved response you're getting on this. I had a totally different energy when I was first doing the notes for this, and I was like, you know what, I'm not even about to lose no sleep over Kevin Hart because I don't even follow him like that to begin with. But again, it's just interesting that these are the people you platform. If it were me, if I was Kevin Hart, neither of them would have even been there. There's other comedians, there's other people. If you have built this career and these connections with all these folks, you mean to tell me these are only the people you can scrape up? Nothing against Regina Hall. I love Regina, so Regina was cool with me. Look, Regina also was giving a side eye to the nonsense, right? But it's kind of like, all right, Kevin, cool. I want to kind of see what you guys have to say here. But to me, Kevin has created a space where now you'll have folks who will use Kevin's response as a justification as to why things aren't that bad. And that's the same thing that they've always done with Black folks. When they can find that one token who will give a pass to foolery or give a pass to nonsense or suck the offense out of the most offensive in order to be digestible for everybody. Because to me, that's kind of the comedian Kevin Hart has been anyway. Kevin Hart has never really been the super intellectual comedian that's gonna make you think outside the box, because there's lots of comedians that are still hilarious, but also I always say they have what you call smart comedy. But even outside of that, because if that's not your style, it's not your style. But there's also people who are public figures or comedians or entertainers who still kind of stand for something. And Kevin has never really been one that's too outspoken, right? He's not going to shake the table too much and mess up the money. Yeah. Now, there was a statement I believe that he made with regard to what happened with George Floyd, but here we are. There was nothing said after this. It's to the point where George Floyd's family even had to respond like, what y'all doing? All right, let me read a few comments here. And then we're going to kind of go from there. But like I said, you keep seeing that pattern. Anytime white people I'm tired of looking at this. Anytime white people get the opportunity to do some racist stuff in comedy, it's like they just got it lined up and ready. Makes me think back to when I was in high school and I was a part of this production. Now, I was the only Black person in this production because nobody wanted to do it. We were supposed to do, I feel like they were going to do The Wiz, but the director changed their mind and we ended up doing some like boring Shakespeare type stuff. It was like a 2-part show, Macbeth, which is boring. And I forgot the other thing. Anyway, so I'm the only Black kid in this. And I remember we had a matinee show. So we've already done the daytime show, and then we're in between shows and just killing time before we do the evening show. And everybody's kind of hanging out and playing the little music and stuff. This is like 2005 or something. So I want to say, I think they were playing Green Day or something. But anyway, while everybody's kind of hanging, I'm drinking whatever little juice or something I have. One of the castmates is like, "Oh, Michael, do you get offended by racially insensitive jokes?" I'm thinking, yes, but actually, I want to see. Yeah, let me see what y'all got in the clip. So I sit there. They start telling these jokes. And what throws me off is that they had so many, right? Like, I mean, they just kept going and go. Like, I was like, y'all, like, they had a whole database. I thought they had like, 3 or 4 jokes. And I mean, mind you, I'm like 16 or 17 at this stage in life. I'm not about to flip the tables over because I like an idiot told them, oh, yeah, I'm not offended. Go ahead, because I want to hear what they had to say. So once I started hearing what they had to say, now I'm over here getting mad. And I mean, they just kept going and going and going. It was like 35 minutes worth of material. Now, I never looked at any of them the same after that. But it just goes to show, y'all are obsessed with us when we're not around. Because my God. Okay, anyway, let me read these comments here. Let's see what we got going. Exactly, Poison Ivy. They wanted people to lose their jobs just for reposting what Charlie Kirk said out of his own mouth. Somebody said it is always that deep. Julian said, bad move on Kevin's part, plus the people funding this Netflix event, including Netflix. Okay, people saying just gross. Somebody said they only remember George Floyd because of the pandemic. Thank you, Baltinam. Who even invited these people? That was my question. Like, are these your friends? That's why I was like, Tony, Okay, that's if this is who you run with. Because if I were ever getting roasted, I'm only gonna want to get roasted by the people closest to me. I don't want some people that I don't really f with trying to go too hard with me. But my closest friends go for it. So I'm just figuring like, oh, y'all must be real good. I don't know, right? But again, those clips are gonna be out there forever of Kevin just sitting there laughing and cackling. Um, let's see. Alan said, like I said before, Kevin Hart has always given sellout vibes. Somebody said Tony is MAGA. He clearly is. He at the rallies. Let's see. Exactly, KO42. These are your associates. Um, mm, 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 mm. Thank you. Victory begins in the says EG. Thank you. Somebody said Malcolm X was completely right about those folks. Mm-hmm. Somebody said I'm clearly not up to speed with Cheryl Underwood. Cheryl Underwood. Now I will say with Cheryl, she held her own in that because she caught a lot. Because first of all, I don't know Cheryl's whole. Okay, my introduction to Cheryl Underwood was Comic View back in the day because I remember she hosted it for some years. But outside of that, I don't really follow her like that. I'd never watched the talk. I know that Cheryl is a Republican, but she's a never MAGA Republican. She's what you call like one of those Bush #1 Republicans, and that's really all I know about her. I had no idea that her husband had killed himself, and the fact that they even made those some jokes. I'm like, jeez Louise. But when they got to Cheryl, they did every kind of, when you do the you misgender and now you try to say she looks like a man, or they talk about her looks, or nobody, like all the kind of crazy things that you can say out there. So to me, every black person on that stage was a target except Regina Hall. They left Regina alone for some reason, which I'm fine with, because now Regina is where I draw the line. Y'all know Regina Hall is one of my favorite people. I might have had to get on a flight and fight for her. But yeah, let's see. Somebody said, I don't care about how a roast is supposed to go at this point. At what point does it go too far? That's my point. How did George Floyd get in it? Because there's nothing that's even remotely funny about any of that situation. And the fact that, again, boy, our channel was on it back in 2020. Boy, it was something every day. We were out here just going in, right? That's Lord. But anyway, for everything that 2020 brought about us, like you had black folks outside during a pandemic when people were dying, right? Fighting for justice for this man, and not just George Floyd, but also Breonna Taylor and I want to say Eliza McClain, all of these different folks. Like, people just tired of the nonsense that was happening, and this was something that sparked an entire movement. And you just kind of see where the value is with somebody like a Tony, who's like, oh, that's just some joke, some black people thing. And you also see Kevin's response, where it's like, okay, yeah, I can laugh at this too. And some people were saying, oh no, it's Kevin doing like just the uncomfortable laugh, just to kind of keep the environment easy. I said, what is easy about that? So your focus is more so keeping the person that's doing the actual offense comfortable with their offensive behavior at your own expense. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like I said, be about something or be about my way. We ain't doing that. Somebody said Kevin has lots of money. He has the power to decide who is going to be there. He is friends with this racist. And again, if they had the clause where you watch all those comedians fight back and not fight back, but abide by the rule of nothing about the cheating on his wife or nothing about the children, except for, I think The Rock said something, and you saw Kevin had a mic then and was like pushing back at The Rock. No, we said no kids, no kids. Okay. I also noticed you didn't grab the mic for the George Floyd bit. I'm noticing this as I'm reliving these scenes here. A mess, right? He said The Rock brought up Kevin's father. I did see that. That's when he pushed the well, The Rock, to me, honestly, The Rock is in the same boat with Kevin Hart. The Rock, I would not trust with my livelihood. The Rock, to me, is somebody who, if there was a room full of all the people in charge and there was a conversation about reparations, I would not trust The Rock to move on my behalf. Same with Kevin Hart. Actually, I wouldn't trust any celebrity. But anyway, let's see where we're at here. Somebody said, we're only their entertainment, present or not. It's sad. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Somebody's got forever said, did anyone catch the joke in quotes that George Floyd was looking up, suggesting that he's in hell. Looking down would be in heaven. I didn't even think about that part. So Tony, yeah. And then these folks don't be getting beat up enough anymore. I'm sorry. That's why a lot of these folks are so confident. I'm sorry. Y'all ain't punching people in the back of the face enough for my liking. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, what up? Umali Abode, say your resident baby boomer caught alive. Thank you for coming. Let's see. Somebody said Kevin has no integrity. Somebody said don't watch the Kevin Hart roasting. Yeah, that's the thing too. But I guess at the same time, I think if somebody tuned into a Kevin Hart roast, they're thinking of Kevin Hart as the comedic actor that does the Jumanji films and ride along. So I'm sure people who probably were watching weren't thinking that when they turn it on, they're going to hear a George Floyd choking joke. All right, that's the reality. So there's that. Oh yeah, and then there was a joke about lynching somewhere in there about him being too short for the thing. That wasn't Tony's joke. That was the other man's joke. And I was like, yeah, white folks, y'all be in the wings ready to have these moments, and there's always gonna be a few token black folks ready to give it to you every single time. Hot freaking mess. Either way, Kevin has bigger fish to fry because I see that entertainment company he has is what $600 million in the hole or something. So good luck with that. He has bigger fish to fry. Okay. We're about to shift gears. Like I said, as far as Kevin, he's not really my kind of entertainer to begin with. So it was just a coincidence that happened to be on TV when I got home. But like, good luck. Just understand, you build your entire platform on the backs of black people. When stuff hits the fan or whatever happens, because I always will say this, a lot of folks who build their careers on the backs of black folks and then kind of cross over and get that commercial access, normally when they do something foolish and they almost lose everything, who is it that they always come back to? They always come back to black folks. It's the same thing in the music industry. You know, sometimes people will cross over and become a crossover act and get that pop audience, and then somehow they piss off that audience, and who do they come back home to? Us every single time. So there's no guarantee folks are always going to be in the wings waiting for you, but y'all just Let's see. So, okay. Somebody said they made jokes about George Floyd, but not Kirk's. What up, man? All right. I want to shift gears. This is going to be a very, 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 very. It might not be that long, but we're about to lock in because if you have followed me for at least 5 years, you know I've spent time and time and time again talking about voting rights, talking about all of the different things that have been going down and what would happen if we weren't careful and why we needed to keep an eye on certain states and what was happening. And we've covered many different cases. We've covered, you know, I remember us covering what was happening in Alabama in 2023. We followed what was going on with Louisiana. And for the last year and a half, I kept telling everybody, keep an eye out, Section 2A of the Voting Rights Act, to the point where we probably have 6 or 7 videos specifically just for voting rights, right? And this is not an I told you so, because that's not going to help anything. I just need us to see the bigger picture. So we've been talking about Voting Rights Act, and I kept saying Section 2A is going to be on the chopping block, and up next will be Section 5, which at this point, Section 5 isn't even enforceable anyway, so I see that one being next. But we've been talking about it. And I just want to say that it is important that people do not all of a sudden get the doom and gloom, woe is me, throw in the towel, I give up energy. Because the reason that we're even here now is because the people on the opposing side who wanted all of this have been dedicated for decades and were willing to let time do its timely thing in order for the right opportunity to come for them to do all the things that they're doing now. We have just entirely too many people who live only in the moment, who only live in the reactionary spaces. And as soon as something gets worse or does not go the way that it's anticipated to go, they want to throw in the towel. And not only throw in the towel, but then they want to bring everybody else with them. And well, none of this matters. We need to just stop caring, or that's why I told y'all your vote don't matter, right? It's always that crew. They be ready, right? And then I'll also say be wary. We're starting to see be wary of what I'm about to say. We're seeing a lot of folks who are building platforms on being contrarian to everything, contrarian to progress, contrarian to reality. And they often do it in a way where they present themselves to be above what is collectively happening to all of us. And they paint that as a way, or paint that as a sign and a show of strength. And it's not a sign of strength or intelligence. It's a sign of you being an individual in a space where it's needed that we move as a collective in order to get things done. But as an individual, you're lining your pockets and you're doing your own thing, Stephen A. Smith, right? That's kind of where we're at. So let us get into this, right? One of the things, I'm always talking about community and discernment. I forgot to say that in the beginning. The thing that we're living by in this moment is always about being in community and in discernment. That's why I was so annoyed with Kevin Hart, because there ain't no discernment in community and none of that. But let's shift to this conversation. One of the things that's important is that we always spend a lot of time talking about cause and effect, and how if you've lived long enough, or if you've studied long enough, or if you've paid attention long enough, you can see the cause and effect of different things that take place. You can see the cause and effect of policy. You can see the cause and effect of being inactive, right? So we're going to talk about everything that has gone down with the Second Amendment. We're going to talk about what happened with Louisiana, with Tennessee, Virginia, Alabama. It's like the floodgates just open. So we're going to just go piece by piece. Bear with me. But before we can get to that, we need to backtrack, because I think, and I know some people probably get annoyed that we keep having these conversations, but we got to teach it, right? It's going to have to get to a point where some of these conversations are so common that you're familiar with the information in the same way you're familiar with the lyrics to your favorite song, right? If I start saying 777, somebody in the chat is already typing 9311. Like, that's how common some of these conversations are going to have to be when it comes to just our collective understanding of what's happening, right? That's the reality. Okay, so we're going to go way back when we're talking Voting Rights Act, okay? Because again, history always repeats itself. So let's go back to the end of the Civil War, right? Civil War ends on, let me move my notes here. Let's just make this a little cleaner. Okay, that way I can talk here. Okay, Civil War ends April 9th of 1865, right? And the way that it's taught to us is people assume everything was just all good. Black people are free. We out there just living it up, and we just going all good, right? Nothing but celebration and compliance. Like, white folks followed along and said, all right, you guys are free. We won't give you a hard time. No, none of that happened, right? There's this assumption that slavery ended and white folks collectively abided by the new laws. That has never been the case. And so in the same way that the federal government had to intervene and force schools to integrate by doing the mandatory busing and everything else like that, they had to do the same during Reconstruction, and they've had to do the same in any instance in history where a law was put into place that benefited, not even benefited, that protected the rights of Black folks. Just protections, not even any extra icing on the cake, just protections. Anytime a law has been put into place to protect the rights of Black citizens, white people have had to be almost dragged into compliance, even when the law was put into place. So let's backtrack a little bit. All right. Civil War ends 1865, that April. Things are not quite aligned. It wouldn't be until December of that same year that, boom, we get the 13th Amendment. Now, the 13th Amendment, I think I had little graphics here just to give you some visual stimulation while I run my mouth here. Wait, that ain't what I want. Okay, never mind. I ain't using that picture. We'll skip that. We'll get a picture for the 14th. All right. Anyway, so December 6, 1865, we get the 13th Amendment. Now, this was going to be the abolishment of slavery, as well as servitude, unless you had been convicted for a crime, right? It ended slavery nationwide and not just in the Confederate States, because what was happening is the war ends, slavery is technically outlawed, but people were still enslaving folks. Even when we get to the conversation of like a Juneteenth, right? Where by the time they get to Galveston, we're now in June. It's been 2-3 months and folks were still working, right? But anyway, fast forward, 13th Amendment happens. Okay, end of slavery. And then we get to July 9th of 1868. I think I got my picture for this one, y'all. Okay, yes. All right, we'll do this one. All right. 1 second. All right. I just need y'all to have a visual while I'm talking. All right. So then you have the 14th Amendment, right? Now, this granted citizenship to those born on U.S. soil. It also prohibited states from denying due process or equal protection of the laws. So when we're talking about something like the 3/5 clause, where when you had the Dred Scott decision and then, they're like, oh, well, this doesn't apply to you because you're not really a full person. You're only 3/5 of a human, right? So things like the 3/5 clause, it also had the portion where there was the insurrection disqualification unless 2/3 of Congress voted to remove this section, meaning that if you ever did anything where you went against the federal government, you could not run for office. Clearly, they ain't listening to that because we saw what happened in 2024, right? And it also granted Congress the power to enforce laws through appropriate legislation, right? So that's 14th Amendment. And then, all right, let me actually switch it here. And then we get to Our 15th Amendment, right? 15th Amendment, February 3rd of 1870. Now, this picture is not from 1870. This picture is much later. This is just people in line to vote, but I needed it to fit the conversation, right? February 3rd of 1870, we get the 15th Amendment. It prohibits federal and state governments from denying citizens the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And so, right, we've gotten the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment all in the span of 5 years. So all good, right? No. That's going to kind of be our theme. Every time I say all good, right, just understand that the answer is going to be no. It was not all celebration and freedom and a good time. So remember how one of the things that I've been saying on this channel is that when it comes to race, nothing is precedent. I've probably been saying that for at least the last 5 or 6 years. Again, white America had to be dog walked into compliance every step of the way when it came to things like Reconstruction and constitutional amendments. So let's dig a little bit deeper. And here's the perfect example. Have you guys ever seen, some teachers do this. I used to do this with my kids too. There's the experiment that teachers do when they're trying to teach students to be better writers and describe things. So you do the thing, or you do the assignment where you get the kids to tell you how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And you're going to get these kids, and this is normally for kids probably 4th grade and down, maybe more even 3rd grade and down, right? So think like a 2nd grader or a 3rd grader. They're going to write that piece of paper and they're going to say, you get the bread and you get the jelly and the peanut butter, and you spread the peanut butter on the bread, you spread the jelly on the bread, and you put the bread together, and now you have a sandwich. So then when the teacher reads back this assignment, and they do it in front of the whole class, like my teacher, Mr. Burke, did this with me in 3rd grade, where he brought like just loaves of bread and peanut butter and jelly, and we were going to have peanut butter and jelly day. And he even told us and told our parents, don't even bring lunch money, or don't bring your own lunch, because we're going to have lunch provided, with these sandwiches. And so all of us had to write this, how to make a sandwich. And so every kid that went, they would write and say what they say. And Mr. Burke would be extremely literal and explicit to what was on the paper. He would only do what was on the paper. So if it said, take the peanut butter and spread it on the bread, if this was the bread, he would grab the jar of peanut butter and just rub the jar on the bread. And all the class, we'd be like, no, you have to open it. You have to open it. But open it wasn't on the piece of paper, right? And so, he put the bottle of the peanut butter on the piece of bread and the jelly, and then try to pass it to the kid and say, enjoy. And so every kid that did their essay on how to make this peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I don't think a single kid in the class got it right the first time. That is literally how the government, or the federal government, when they're on the right side of history, has had to dog walk white America into complying with the laws. White America has found a way to dig through every single loophole and any kind of moment where they can find a way to undo a law that was stated. And so what they would do a lot of times is play stupid when it comes to interpretation and say, oh, I didn't realize it meant that. And so that's one of the things that has been taking place, even when we talk about the conversation of voting rights, right? And so when it comes to that example that I did with the sandwich, that's literally how the enforcement of granting equality and equity to Black folks has gone this entire time. So I want to give some examples, because again, while there were always attempts at progress, there were always bigger attempts on the other end of the spectrum as far as that extremity to kind of shut down any Black progress when it came to just, the livelihood in America. Because remember, we have the Civil War in, and we jump right into Reconstruction. So Reconstruction begins in 1865. But remember, the Black codes also start in 1866, starting in Mississippi. So just as they begin these different programs that are supposed to try to make life a little bit better for all of these new people who have been freed and are trying to build their lives and start up whatever, in that same token, on the other end of the spectrum, here come the Black codes. In addition to that, the Klan is founded in 1866 as a self-defense organization, because the narrative was, oh gosh, these Black people are free and they are so violent. We are so afraid. Oh no, we have to protect ourselves. So let's get together and we'll put on hoods and we'll go terrorize everybody in the name of self-defense, right? So you have that happening. So then, like I said, after we get the emergence of the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment, all is not well. As a matter of fact, you get an increase in violence, backlash, intimidation tactics, lynchings, all these different things take place, right? And so something must be done. So then we end up getting what you call 3 different enforcement acts. And these were all enforcement acts on the KKK. Stay with me. This all still ties to voting rights. This is, again, we got to paint the full picture so you can see a pattern that has just continued. All right. So May 31st, 1870, we get the Enforcement Act. It's also called the KKK Act. Now, this act aimed to counteract violence and voter suppression, as well as protecting Black people's rights to hold office and to serve on juries. Because you got to think about it too. Black folks were, when you go to trial, they tell you that you're going to be judged by a jury of your peers. White folks weren't trying to have no Black folks on their jury. So a lot of times Black folks could not serve on the juries, all that different stuff like that, right? Black folks often dismissed. So again, it counteracts violence, voter suppression, as well as protecting Black people's rights to hold office and to serve on juries. In addition to that, it expanded the federal power of the courts to hear voter interference cases, because again, you had all these different instances in every little town where Black people were trying, or specifically Black men, because right now Black women don't have the right to vote yet, only the Black men, right? And so, you know, these Black voters are trying to go and do whatever, and there's all kind of things taking place. And every time they try to fight at the state level, because the state is in on it as well, we investigated ourselves. We found we did nothing wrong. Please go home. So now let's bring in the federal pieces, right? And in addition to that, Enforcement Act number 1 prohibited the Klan from wearing their hoods and joining in as what you call groups to go and terrorize. So they were not allowed to gather in groups with the hoods on, because that meant we knew you were doing something terrible. All good, right? No, because unfortunately, with the act, there was some success, but the voter harassment continued. The violence continued. States were still doing whatever they wanted to because there weren't enough people around to enforce it. And so states were still like, yeah, well, we'll close this polling place. That way we don't have to worry about Black people showing up there. You know, we'll make chaotic hours so Black people can't go. And, you know, all right, we've been told that as the Klan, we can't gather in front of a polling station with our hoods and intimidate people. But you know what we can do? We can camp out on that back road that you got to take to get to that polling station. And we can set up shop. And we can snatch you and pull you into the woods, or we can snatch and do whatever. Because hey, we weren't at the polling station; we were just on the roads, just keeping patrol, citizens arrest, right? And so it goes back to that conversation of the sandwich, or as far as like making the sandwich with the kids. They found every loophole within Enforcement Act Part 1 and found their ways around it. So now that brings us to February 28th, 1871, where we get Second Enforcement Act. Now, this one gave more federal oversight into voter registration and counting of the ballots, especially in cities and towns that had more than 20,000 residents. In addition to that, federal judges and U.S. Marshals were there to ensure the integrity of the voting process and tighter controls over the voting policies. They pretty much understood that, okay, folks were playing around. We told these states this is what they got to do. They're not really following it. So, you know, we're going to start sending in more people to kind of handle and regulate. And now a lot of the cases that are happening at your state level, we're actually going to create the jurisdiction where we can actually step up and take on some of those cases in the federal courts and shut down some of the nonsense that you're having. All good, right? No, because of course, so much was intertwined within the state level as far as corruption that the crime still wasn't slowing. The attacks still weren't slowing. The lynchings still weren't slowing. Black folks were still being disenfranchised when it came to voting, even though they technically, as far as the men, had the right to vote. So then we get to April 20th of 1871, which was the third Enforcement Act, also known as the Civil Rights Act of 1871, aka also the KKK Act. Now, this act actually technically dismantled the Klan. Federal troops were sent to the state of South Carolina that October to break up the Klan's ecosystem, because their ecosystem was so embedded within the state that your police, your judges, your doctors, everybody who was in a position of power, all of them were somewhat tied to the Klan. And we've talked about this before. I want to say this is with the Ocoee, Florida massacre, where at one point in time in that town, the entire police force had to have an association with the Klan, or they wouldn't be what you call the chartered police force, if I'm correct. I want to say that's the Ocoee, Florida, some of the stuff that built up to that. But anyway, so again, third act, yep, Klan, we just going to have to dismantle y'all. Federal government's going to step in. We're going to break up what it is that y'all got. We're breaking up these ecosystems. Federal troops are sent in. And that is that. That's that, right? All good, right? No, because by the time we get to 1876, the Supreme Court starts to cave. They would undermine many of the provisions in those three acts. And they actually would rule, which we're about to shift gears and go into one story. They ruled that the 14th Amendment and the Bill of Rights only protected citizens from the state and federal government, but not citizens. And so what ended up happening, let me go ahead and go to this story because we're about to shift gears for one quick second. Do I want to use this one? Okay, I'm gonna come back to that one. All right, let's go here. So here's an image that I want you guys to lock in with here. This is the Colfax massacre of Louisiana, right? So in 1872, there was a gubernatorial race in Louisiana, right? This is for governor, right? And actually, did I bring, let's see, I think I have a piece I want to read while I'm at it too. Give me 1 second, let's see if I have it on here. Yeah, let me pull this one up first. Let's shift gears here. Sorry, guys. All right. So in 1872, John McHenry was elected governor in one of the most controversial and bizarre elections in Louisiana history. Though Governor Henry Clay Warmoth declared McHenry the victor, the state elections returning board split into two rival panels after the election. One panel supported Warmoth and proclaimed victory for McHenry. I'm saying his name wrong. McHenry, whatever his name is, right? While the other contended that the radical Republican William Pitt Kellogg won the election. As a result, Louisiana effectively had two governors and two legislatures, each claiming to be the official government. President Ulysses S. Grant attempted to settle the dispute on May 22nd of 1873, recognizing Kellogg as the governor. But McHenry and his supporters continued to protest the results. Now I want to go back to that image that I had earlier. So going back to Colfax. So some additional context. All right, now remember, this is the era where the parties sat on the opposite sides of history. So this is the time when what would be today's Republicans were yesterday's Democrats, and what are today's Democrats were yesterday's Republicans. And so when they had this election, Kellogg won 56% of the vote. He won, right? He won. McHenry was like, nah, they ain't won. Something don't add up. And they just refused to abide by the fact that they lost and refused to contest. And that's why we ended up having two temporary governments. And so the McHenry supporters felt that everything was rigged. And their beef and what they were afraid of was that Kellogg, who also supported the idea of civil rights and furthering the progress of Reconstruction, they felt that Kellogg would give Black people too much access to liberation, give Black people too much access to just basic rights. And they felt that he was a traitor to the race. And so they were pissed. And they did not want him to become governor, even though he lost. And the idea that some of the fact that Kellogg got into office was because Black men voted for him, just that was driving them crazy. And so as a result, the Democrats of that era contested and decided to take over the Grant Parish courthouse. And so at the same time, the Black folks in that town had known it had been some mess. Because mind you, it's been a few months. This election is in 1872. They're still fighting and arguing well into 1873. And so there was a Black militia that was there to protect the courthouse. However, they were outarmed and outnumbered, and a white militia of 300 shows up to the courthouse. They even have a cannon, right? You know, when white folks are mad and it's time to be violent, they get on code. And so they end up killing upwards of 156 Black men at this courthouse. Now, why does that matter? Why did we even tell the story? Well, remember how I said in 1876, the Supreme Court ruled that the 14th Amendment only protected citizens from the state and the federal government, but not citizens? All of the people who had been convicted during the Colfax massacre, because a lot of white folks actually got imprisoned over this, all of their convictions were overturned. Overturned. You showed up, and remember what we said about the insurrection in the other amendment earlier and all that stuff. This is technically an insurrection. They showed up to the state courthouse trying to contest the election results. They kill 156 Black men. They even have a cannon ready to shoot off. And then a few years later, 3 years later at that, Supreme Court is like, yeah, all that was bad, but, well, to play devil's advocate, because that's what people love to do all the time, to play devil's advocate, technically the 14th Amendment protects you from us on this bench as far as the federal government. But if John Boy and Jim Bob from whatever part of Louisiana want to come and terrorize a courthouse and kill your family members, it's not protected under the 14th Amendment, or they are protected under the 14th Amendment as far as the element of them not getting in trouble, because the 14th Amendment only applies to state and federal enforcement. And so things were not great yet. And in addition to that, because this is all in response to our question of all good, right? And the answer is still no. So the first part of the no, Supreme Court, right? They undermined some of the provisions in 1876, ruled that the 14th Amendment and Bill of Rights only protected citizens from the state actions and not individuals. In addition to that, they overturned the convictions from the Colfax massacre. And then in addition to that, a new group magically appears in November of 1871. Now remember, in April of 1871, the Klan officially gets dismantled. In April of 1871. And by November of 1871, a new group starts that has a similar number of memberships and seems to be comprised of many people who share the very same thoughts and beliefs as the Klan. And this new group would be called the NRA, right? So the NRA becomes an entity. And because they are technically a non-profit organization and an agency, there are some protections that they are given which allow them to go and also terrorize Black people at that point in time. And at the same time, the Klan technically never really dies. They just reemerge in different forms. They reemerge in the 1910s after the premiere of Birth of a Nation, and they blow up in 1915. And between 1915 and 1944, they have their largest enrollment ever. The only reason they end up folding in 1944 is because for some reason they ended up $685,000 in debt and they shut down. But don't worry, because they reemerged again by the 1950s. All right. So again, this conversation of being dragged into submission, folks aren't trying to budge. This is all in response to the fact that Black people got freedom and got the right to vote and got the right to own land and got the right to be in a jury and got the right to run for office. And as a pushback, as a way to say no, we get the lynchings, we get the church burnings, we get the violence, we get the massacres, we get the emergence of the Klan, which eventually forms into the NRA. And then now you got the Klan and the NRA together at the same time. It's dual membership, pretty much. You have all that going. And then at the same time, even people in positions of power refuse to abide by what is being enforced and still push back, right? Then to make things even worse. Now, mind you, this is still the Reconstruction era. So while all that is happening, there is some element of good that was trying to take place, where you had all these programs that were aimed at helping Black people kind of get on their feet and get educated and have all these different things. But by 1877, Democrats had regained control of the South. And remember, this is the Democrats of yesterday, not the Democrats of today. Like we said, the parties had their switch, because I know people love to bring it. Well, the Democrats were the party of and the Republicans free. Yes, but like we said with the Nene Leaks, what about now? Okay. Anyway, so remember, during Reconstruction, one of the ways that Reconstruction was also enforced is that federal troops had to be sent down to the South to enforce these laws, to make sure that Black people's rights weren't being violated and everything else like that. But by the time we get to 1877, Democrats have regained control of the South. The troops have left. You also had Andrew Johnson, who was just the scum of the earth, who replaced Lincoln. And Andrew Johnson wasn't down with that Reconstruction bit. So he was a part and just all in the way on top of that. If you were on the last book club we did when Clay Kane was a guest, we talked about how even when you were having the convention, because this conversation of slavery is just so triggering for the racists, even back then, while they were having the GOP convention to nominate Abraham Lincoln as the presidential candidate for the party, they were so petty as far as the GOP, they nominated a Democrat of the opposing party to be his vice president, Andrew Johnson, with the hopes of, if Abraham Lincoln ever, or quit or whatever, his vice president could actually go and do what it is that the party really actually wanted, because they were all about the bringing the country together in a union, but they really initially weren't all about freeing Black people. They weren't all about Black people even staying if they did get free. Send them back to the continent, send them to Central or South America, send them somewhere, but we don't want them in our way. That was the reality. Anyway, so we get to 1877. Democrats have regained control of everything. They pass all kinds of laws designed to stop Black voters. Poll taxes. Actually, here's a perfect example. Let's pull this one up. All right. Just for some context, here's a great example of a poll tax. Now, this one is from 1894. This is for the state of Tennessee. And in order to vote, not even vote, I'm sorry, just to register to vote. And there's not even a guarantee that you're going to be approved, because, they're finding every loophole and way to make you not vote. You'd have to pay $2. Now, $2 might not sound like a lot now, but if we're talking about 1894, $2 was the equivalent of $79.19. Meanwhile, we got folks who got an attitude about voting for free. Right? So imagine you got to spend about $80 to vote in an era where this is pre-middle class America. We're in the beginning of our industrial era, but wages, there's not wage regulation yet. Some people don't have technically what would be the equivalent of almost $80 for something like registering to vote. They don't have it, right? Because boy, all right. So, but you get what I'm saying, right? So there's that. So anyway, we're going to fast forward a little bit. So we jump to the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote. Lovely. However, Black women are not necessarily protected by the 19th Amendment in the same realm as white women because, again, you had that icky thing of race. And like I said, once we saw the gutting and the ending of what you call Reconstruction, this created a period of decades where states came up with so many draconian laws, additional Black codes. We got convict leasing, where, again, like we've talked about in some of our previous videos, you were more likely to die in convict leasing than you were in slavery. Why? Because when it was the era of slavery, people didn't want to kill those that they had owned because they were expensive. They were privately purchased. When it came to convict leasing, anytime, you needed to do whatever, you could just get somebody from the state. So if somebody was on the chain gang and they dropped dead from over exhaustion, all you got to do is just make sure you over abuse the Black codes and find another reason to arrest somebody else Black. And the next thing you know, you arrest them and convict them and they're on a chain gang and they're replaced. So when you're talking about those Black codes, like vagrancy laws, you could be arrested for not having a job. You could be arrested for looking at a white woman crazy. You could be arrested for not even having the area that you live in being clean enough, right? They were finding every reason to lock us up. So you're getting locked up and you end up in the convict leasing system. And the convict leasing system was something that was very profitable. And it was a way where people made a lot of money. But at the same time, people became even more vile because if people died in the system of convict leasing, it didn't matter because you had a system that was there that could always go and get more folks. That's the piece about the 13th Amendment that we also have to look at when we're looking at both sides of that amendment. Yes, it freed people, but it also had the clause where you have your freedoms and you can't be locked into a position of servitude unless you are incarcerated by the state or the federal government, or you are a felon. Now those rights are done and they can do whatever they want to you. So we fast forward. Back in the day, it was the convict leasing. Today is license plates and being on the side of the freeway and painting the lines in the street, right? So you have that going on, all right? The thing that I want people to understand is that by the time we go from 1877 up until the time when we get ready for the next round of the Voting Rights Act in 1865, Black Americans would have been disproportionately roadblocked from voting in 22 presidential elections. 22. That's 15 different presidents, because some people serve more than one term, right? That is 15 different presidential administrations. And you got to really sit and think about all of the things that take place in one presidential administration. Take a look at everything that's just happening in Trump's second term. We're only about a year and a few months in, and look at how much is already going down. Look at how much policy has shifted. Look at how much, life as we know it is not even the same right now. When you look at what has been cut and gutted, what new laws have been made, so imagine that times 15. You had all these things taking place in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, the 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and Black people collectively were not in a capacity where they'd be allowed to really vote on what it is that they want, because the men had the right to vote, but you had so much voter disenfranchisement and intimidation tactics and violence that the voter turnout rate was never super high up until we got, to the Voting Rights Act of 1865, right? So I want to pause for 1 second because now we got to get into the Voting Rights Act of 1865, but I've been talking for a really long time. Let me just read a few comments and then actually, no, I'm going to just finish this whole segment and we'll go to the comments. Let me just keep going while I'm on a roll. I'm sorry. Y'all know I don't like to talk too long and not give you guys the floor, but let's just get through all of this first, okay? Or at least the first half. All right. So we get the Voting Rights Act in 1865. Now, what triggered the Voting Rights Act in general was that things had become so extreme that people had to look and say, if something is not done, it will only get worse, right? Because again, this goes back to, people having to be dog walked into compliance. And so when we talk about the Voting Rights Act of 1865, there are three main sections that I want to highlight. And these are the three sections we've talked about forever and a day. But these are the sections that were the most important, that played a role as to why the black vote had the run that it had between 1965 and I'm going to say 2013, actually 2009. All right. So there were several sections in this Voting Rights Act. I want to pull up a map here. All right. So we're going to start with Section 5. And we're going to highlight Section 5, Section 2, and Section 4. But let's start with Section 5. So Section 5 is what you call the pre-clearance requirement. Now, Section 5 requires certain states and local governments with a history of discrimination to get federal approval before changing their voting laws. This was called pre-clearance. And this covered jurisdiction. And what this meant is the jurisdictions that were covered, they had to submit their changes to the U.S. Department of Justice or to a federal court in Washington, D.C. Now, an example of things that they would have to get approved before they ever try to do it would be things like redistricting the maps, polling place closures, voter ID laws, changes in election procedures, right? Now, this is, again, the clearance clause. And this came into play because there were so many elements of shenanigans that were taking place that kept preventing black voters from having access to the ballot box. This is when folks were counting jelly beans and doing all these, just anything silly to kind of get people to stop, just even wanting to show up, right? And so there were a handful of states that were identified that needed to go through what you call a pre-clearance. And the goal was to stop discriminatory laws before they took effect. That is Section 5. And so with Section 5, the following states had to abide by this pre-clearance: Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Texas, and Virginia. In addition to that, there were also states that had districts or counties that had to also abide by, where maybe the entire state didn't necessarily have to abide by the pre-clearance, but there were different districts that had to. I'm going to come back to that section because that ties to a lawsuit from 2009. But California had 3 counties that had to go through pre-clearance. Florida had 5 counties. Michigan had 2 townships. New York had 3 counties. North Carolina, like, they should have just did the whole state, because North Carolina had 40 counties that would have to go through pre-clearance. South Dakota had 2 counties that would have to go through pre-clearance. And Vermont had several subdivisions that had to go through pre-clearance. And so then we get to Section 4. Now, just stay with me. So again, Section 5 that's the pre-clearance, and these are the states. Now, Section 4 has 2 parts, 4A and 4B. Let's go over 4A. 4A, this was what established a formula to identify the areas with a history of discriminatory places and then provide them with stringent remedies where appropriate. So again, for Section 4A, 4A is going to identify the steps that these states that have to, do the pre-clearance, these are what these states are going to have to do. So with 4A, if you were one of the states that had to go through pre-clearance, your part of Section 4A there was a 5-year suspension in your state on things like a test or device to vote. So like a literacy test, 5-year ban on a literacy test if you were one of those states that had to go through the pre-clearance. In addition to that, the second was the implementation of Section 5, of course, the pre-clearance. And then in addition to that, there would also be the portion where an attorney general would have to certify that the specified jurisdiction also required the appointment of federal examiners, which meant that they would have the final say on who would and wouldn't be qualified to vote. So to say that in layman's terms, in addition to, the 5-year ban on things like counting jelly beans and a literacy test, and in addition to being a pre-clearance state, there's going to be examiners coming from a federal level that come to your state to pretty much run your elections. And then in addition to that, they're going to be the ones who get to determine whether or not somebody's qualified to vote. And then in addition to that, the fourth part would be that the attorney general also sends federal observers to the jurisdictions that need federal examiners. So the federal government sends examiners to make sure that you're not tripping. But in addition to that, they send observers to make sure that the examiners are doing their part. So it's like, we're going to double down and make sure that you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. So this group that's upholding the law and being tasked to do that at a federal level, they're going to do it, but we're going to send somebody just to double check and make sure that they're doing it as well. Just think of like the supervisor for the supervisor. That's what that was, right? Now, I will say one of the things that ended up taking place was that there was also a clause where it said after 5 successful years of being in compliance, you could bail out of this, what you call the pre-clearance, if you were found to be in compliance for the entire 5 years. Now, it sounds easier said than done. And the reason why is because you got to picture a place like Texas that is massive. And you got to think of all the jurisdictions that a place like Texas would have when it comes to precincts. And then you have to think of the fact that every single precinct would have to be in compliance. But remember, let's see how many precincts are in Texas. Do they have the number I have on here? What the number? Okay, for the sake of time, since I didn't look that up before I started, I'm gonna leave it alone. But we know it's a lot. Actually, Electoral College. What's their electoral votes? How many? Texas, and this is not even fully accurate because that's just the electoral votes on a federal level. Come on, why is my thing not showing properly? This says, okay, this one says 40 for 2024. All right, that's not technically accurate for that era, but anyway. So just imagine you have 40 different districts that have to be in compliance, and all it takes is one to mess it up. This is kind of like when you're in the elementary class and your teacher says, if the entire class behaves, we can have a pizza party. And you get that one kid in the class. Oh, let me backtrack. The teacher's going on vacation and they're going to have a substitute. And the teacher says, if the substitute gives me a good report that you guys all listened and behaved, we can have a big pizza party. We get to that next day, substitute teacher time. You always get that one in the class who's going to F it up for everybody. So when we're talking about that 5 years of being in compliance, all it took was one of them districts to mess it up. Now you got to start over, right? And so understand that there were many states that had to keep starting over and over and over. So that's Section 4A. Then we have Section 4B, right? Now this is what established the coverage formula. So it pretty much prescribed what states and jurisdictions with a history of discrimination were required to retain a pre-clearance under Section 5 before implementing the change of voter law or practice, right? And so this was kind of, again, the places were identified based on places that either did like literacy tests or they had very, very, very low voter turnouts or registration turnouts for Black voters. So to sum this up as easily as possible, Section 5 is kind of saying you're bound by a pre-clearance before you can make any changes to the election process. You have to get permission to change anything. That's Section 5. You are one of the states that have been identified. You must have pre-clearance to make any kind of changes to your election process. Section 4A. Here are the 4 steps that you must abide by in order to be in compliance with federal law and in order for you to get the bailout from Section 5. And that was those 4 things that we talked about where, you know, the 5-year ban on jelly beans and all that other stuff like that. And then Section 4B was you have been identified as one of the states that need a pre-clearance since you don't know how to act, right? So that's Section 5 and Section 4. The last section that we want to highlight is Section 2, right? Now, Section 2 was the nationwide ban on voter discrimination. Section 2 applied to the entire United States. It prohibited any voting law or practice that discriminates on the basis of race, color, or membership in a language or minority group. So examples of cases that are normally brought up under Section 2 would be racial gerrymandering, which is what we just saw going on with Louisiana, election systems that dilute minority voting power, discriminatory ID laws, and then at-large elections designed to weaken the Black or Latino vote, right? And so that was the Voting Rights Act that's passed in 1965. And those were the main elements that made it enforceable and that made it easier for people to vote. Section 5, Section 4A and 4B, and Section 2A. Now, just to show the progress that took place, the Voting Rights Act passes in 1865. In 1865, when it came to any votes, as far as Black voters, Alabama had an 11% turnout for Black voters. When we got to the following year, 1866, that Black voter turnout went from 11% to 51% in 1 year. And mind you, this is a midterm year. This wasn't even a presidential election. This is midterms, right? And I will say the rate that it's kind of been for Black voters in general for most presidential elections since about 1865, 66 has always been about 60% nationwide for Black people in general. It's hovering around 60% most of the time. Sometimes as low as about 51. When Barack Obama ran in 2008, it was as high as about 65, 66. All right. So that's an example. Alabama going from 11% black voter turnout to 51% in 1 year. Tennessee going from 27% black voter turnout to 72% in 1 year. Black officials doubled from 72 to 159, right? Only 4 southern states had a black turnout less than 50%. So you can see that there's an element of progress. You can see that the law had impact. All good, right? No, because ever since then, we've been under attack. Ever since then. So now we need to talk about what happened to all these wonderful sections that have all been stripped at this point. So when we go back, and we've covered this a few times before, but like I said, we're going to keep this going because, again, this needs to be as common as 7779311. Okay. All right. So we get to 2009. Now, you know our boy, who remembers our favorite person that we always have to bring up any single time that we talk about voting rights, because this person is literally at the hands of every suit that finds its way to the Supreme Court to disenfranchise. Somebody in the chat, please drop the name of our favorite person when it comes to voting rights. Plus, I can get my sip. Or is my chat frozen? Let's see. Y'all got Juneteenth. Okay, no, not Lindsey Graham, but F him too. He can get whacked too. Not Lindsey Graham. All right, people. Who have I been talking about and dragging for years now? Voting rights. Think affirmative action gutted behind this man. Think the attack on one person, one vote. This man. Well, we know Clarence Thomas is a coon, but that's not the. He's the judge. But I'm talking about. Thank you. Astroshan 8887. Edward Bloom. Edward is dedicated to this work, right? Okay, so I've already done a million videos on Edward Bloom, so we won't go through all his cases, but we're going to go through the ones that specifically are about these sections that we talked about. So the stripping of Section 4A took place in 2009, and this is because Edward Bloom decided he was going to have a lawsuit, and in this lawsuit, he was stating that, hey, it's unfair to blanket an entire state and make them have to abide by a pre-clearance because the whole state, we don't all move the same. And so his example was, I found a district in Texas that is just loving and they're so kind and the black people have a great time voting. And so I feel that there shouldn't have to be a 4A section of the Voting Rights Act because it's not fair to me and what I have going. And at this point, everybody's learned their lesson and everybody's behaving, so we don't need Section 4A. And the Supreme Court decided, yeah, we agree. And they voted 8-1 for it. And it would have been 9-0, but Clarence Thomas actually dissented on this one. And it wasn't because he wanted this to, or he didn't want this to be gone. He felt that if you're going to get rid of Section 4A, you need to get rid of Section 5 as well, because now Section 5 is going to be harder to enforce. So that's the only reason he dissented on it. So 2009, Section 4A of the Voting Rights Act, gutted. Then we get to 2013. Now, this is the one that did some serious damage, all right? The gutting of Section 4B in the Shelby v. Holder case. Now, this is in 2013 where they gut Section 4B, and literally on the same day that Section 4B is gutted in 2013, Texas implemented some very strict voter ID laws in the same day. Couldn't wait, right? Texas was like, it's go time. Let's get it. Let's go, right? Go time. And because of that, remember, Section 4B was what protected against a bunch of silly things like the crazy strict voter ID laws, counting the jelly beans, anything that's pretty inhumane. That's what Section 4B kind of fought against. So remember how I was dragging Brian Kemp because at one point he was trying to make it illegal to pass people bottles of water while they stood in line to vote in Georgia when it's hot as Lord knows what outside. That wasn't something that could happen when Section 4B was in power. When you saw the massive influx of not just voter ID laws, but the short turnaround time for people to be in compliance, that couldn't have happened until after Section 4B was gutted, right? So there was that. That's Section 4B. Then we get to Section 2A, which is as of last week. We spent some time talking about this Louisiana case with the districts. And so, boom, April 27th of this year, we saw Section 2A not technically be stripped, but be reinterpreted, which meant, this goes back to, again, when we say you got to dog walk people to follow and comply with the law. They're being real simple in saying, well, I don't know if this is how this technically works. And they're literally using the very language that was created to protect voters from disenfranchisement. They literally used the exact same language to disenfranchise. And they said, well, the case was all about Louisiana, where, there were the two districts. Initially, there was one district, and they were trying to create the two districts, so there was black representation in more than one district. They came up and said that's discrimination and racism against white people. So even in a state that has this massive black population, it should be fine that they only have one district that represents them, right? That was kind of the energy that was there. I want to go back a little bit just to give us some additional context, because one of the things that we also need to think about is, remember how I keep saying people kept giving an inch to nonsense, or something isn't that bad, or y'all doing the most. I want to show you where y'all doing the most gets us. All right, so let me share this piece here, because I want to go back to section 4B, because when you hear the reasonings as to why section 4B was gutted, all right, it is some nonsense and some foolery. All right, let's see. Let's start with Chief Justice Roberts, who's already been pressed to kind of get us up out of here anyway. First of all, Justice Roberts, this one right here, he's the guy that kind of calls all the shots with the Supreme Court. He has been after the Voting Rights Act since 1981, right? He remember how I said there are some people who live in reactionary spaces and it's all about the then and the now, and then there's people who are in it for the long haul. He is a long hauler, right? He's been working. All right, so anyway, yes, Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, and this is Chief Justice. Yes, Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional. Chief Justice John Roberts delivered the opinion on the 5-4 majority. The court held that Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act imposes current burdens that are no longer responsive to the current conditions in the voting districts in question. Although the constraints this section places on specific states made sense in the 60s and the 70s, they do not any longer and now represent an unconstitutional violation of power to regulate elections that the Constitution reserves for the states. The court also held that the formula for determining whether changes to a state's voting procedure should be federally reviewed is now outdated and does not reflect the changes that have occurred in the last 50 years in narrowing the voting turnout gap in states in question. In his concurring opinion, Justice Clarence Thomas argued that, like we were just talking about, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act is also unconstitutional in addition to Section 4. He wrote that the blatant discrimination against the certain voter, he wrote that the blatant discrimination against certain voters that Section 5 was intended to prohibit is no longer evident. Without such extraordinary circumstances, Congress cannot constitutionally justify placing the burden of Section 5 on the states in question. Now, to that Section 5 piece, he initially had that response to the gutting of Section 4A back in 2009. We're now in 2013, and he's still saying Section 5 got to go. It's got to go. Now, the point that I want you guys to harp on, let me see, what's I going to add here? I'll throw this away. Okay, the point that I want you guys to harp on is Justice Roberts, his reasoning in layman's terms was that racism ended, right? And again, this was the whatchamacallit? That was the Shelby v. Holder case when we're talking Section 4B. He's pretty much saying racism is over. There's not a need for any of this because the conditions no longer exist. Everybody knows how to act now. We don't need it. And then you got Clarence Thomas who's saying, yeah, and if you got Section 4A, you got to get rid of Section 5. Like Clarence, like let's tear it all down. Let's get all of it. By the way, I really want to do a deep dive on Clarence Thomas so bad, because that to go from that man going from being like a Fred Hampton to what he is now, it's like how did we get here? But anyway, Justice Roberts kept stating that yes, those conditions no longer exist. We don't need that anymore because the people know how to act, right? The racism has ended. Barack Obama is president. We don't need to protect and ensure that voting rights are going to be safe because Americans have learned from their ways. Now, everybody else knew this was some nonsense because even the case being brought up was showcasing that you had this racist white man, Edward Bloom, who was on his, who had a vendetta against black people in general since he lost one of his elections back in 1996 and has not taken his foot off our necks ever since, right? It's all right there. The pieces are there. But again, this was the dream of Roberts to begin with since 1981. He was finding every reason. So now, then we fast forward to, 2026, and we get to the Louisiana situation with Section 2A. Let's see. Do I want to read this real quick? I actually do not. I'm trying to not talk y'all ears off with all this stuff. But let's see. I just want to make sure I have. Okay, let's do this. I'm going to read a different article that's a little bit shorter, and then I want to jump into Louisiana. Okay. Actually, no. This is what I'm going to do. So, like I said, Robert says the racism stuff ends. We're all good, and then we get to Louisiana. The Supreme Court decides to reiterate or reinterpret, excuse me, what Section 2A is going to mean. And immediately we saw states jump into action. Now, just to kind of paint the picture, we already knew Texas was already doing what Texas was doing long before this judgment came, right? So August of 2025, Texas decides to redraw their maps, right? Remember, Section 2 is all about the drawing the maps and making sure that maps are not racially discriminatory, right? Anyway, Texas decides to do their maps. Texas's reasoning is it's not about race, it's about political affiliation. And if we can redraw our maps, we'll get 5 GOP seats. And then the following month, Missouri decides they're going to redraw their map, and they will gain 1 GOP seat. And then by that October, North Carolina decides they're going to try to redo their map as well, and that will give them 1 more seat. And then Ohio decides that they're going to do the same thing as well, and that will give them 2 seats. And then in November, California was like, all right, y'all tripping. We're going to have a voter referendum, and if the people vote on it, that will have us redraw our stuff. And then that will give the Democrats 5 seats, right? And that passes in California at 64%. And then Utah has one where they redraw and the Democrats gain 1 seat. And then Virginia, which is recent, as of a few weeks ago, they decide that they want to redraw their maps. They had the people vote on it. The people voted in at a percent of 51. And then Virginia is going to redraw their map. But sit tight, because we know what's about to happen, and nobody's getting off that smooth, right? And then May 4th, you have Florida, who decides they're jumping into this conversation as well. They're redrawing. That's going to gain 4 GOP seats. And then Tennessee, as recently as last week, right? They have their situation with regard to what they want to do and get rid of the 1 black district that they do have, and that will gain a GOP seat. And in addition to that, you have other states that are also considering jumping into this fight as well. You got Kansas, you got Illinois, you got Colorado, you got South Carolina, Washington, New Hampshire, Maine, and New Jersey. Now, I want to go back to our conversation on Louisiana, because this is where it gets very interesting. I know I apologize, because normally I'd be in the chat. Let me just get through all of this, and then we can chop it up and talk. All right, let me make sure y'all can see what I see. Yes, see what I see. All right. The U.S. Supreme Court strikes another severe blow to the Voter Rights Act. All right. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision along partisan lines, ruled that Louisiana's 2024 election map, which created a second majority black congressional district, was unconstitutional, or was an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. Although the court technically kept Section 2 of the voting rights intact, Wednesday's decision is the latest in a series of rulings that have all but gutted the landmark 1965 law, which came out of the civil rights movement and protected the collective voting power of racial minorities. Experts expect the ruling to diminish minority representation across all levels of the government. This is one of the most important and pernicious decisions of the Supreme Court in the last century, said Rick Hansen, an election law expert who leads the Safeguarding Democracy Project at UCLA, in an interview with NPR. What's left of the Voting Rights Act is a hollow shell of what it was before. And really what's left is you have Section 4C through F or I think. And again, Section 5 is there, but Section 5 can no longer be enforced because you need Section 4 in order for Section 5 to work. It isn't clear yet how this decision will affect November's midterm elections. As candidates filing deadlines and primaries have passed in many states, meaning it would seem to be too late in those places to redraw maps in response to the ruling. Lawmakers and candidates in states such as Tennessee and Georgia quickly called for new districts on Wednesday. The state most affected is Louisiana, which is now forced to redraw its congressional map, likely with 1 fewer Democratic-leaning districts. The High Court's ruling reinterprets longstanding protections under the Voting Rights Act in Section 2 and places with racially polarized voting. Plaintiffs are suing to argue that political lines dilute minority voting power must now prove discriminatory intent and not just discriminatory effect. So now you got to show the intent of the racism and not just the effect. I'm going to actually stop it there because that's what's playing in your face. Because when it comes to the idea of intent, black farmers weren't granted the luxury of being able to show racist or racial intent when they sued the federal government in 1999 for discriminatory practices. And the Supreme Court said that you can't prove racism that way. You have to just show the harmful effects of it. Now we fast forward here, and you have a case where they're saying, well, no, you have to show the intent. You just can't show the effect. So they will sit here and play games in your face with the very same laws that they've somewhat created, where rules apply for some situations but don't apply for others. So again, when we're talking about what was going on in Louisiana, I'm going to pull up the image of what the map looked like. We literally just covered this story a few months ago because we spent a lot of time talking about Section 2A. At one point, Louisiana only had one district that served, a black voting population. And then they decided, or then they pretty much ended up having to update their map, and we ended up getting this Section 6 here. And there became 2 districts. And even looking at how these districts are drawn, what they pretty much did is found where all the black people live and put them in a district, put them in a district. That's what you get. Now, GOP said, oh, this is discriminatory against white people. And yeah, that's not going to fly. And so this is this is what's been in the courts for the last few years. And now the court finally decided and said, oh yeah, that's not going to work. So now, Section 6, that has to go, and y'all got to redraw these maps. Now, can we talk about some of the problems that are actually going to take place with Louisiana? First, let's start with Louisiana. Early voting had already started for their elections. 45,000 people had already cast their vote. Those votes will now be thrown out as they try to figure out how to do whatever else they're doing. And let me see what else I want to add here. And I guess if I were giving context to what was going on with Louisiana, on demand to the state, the legislature passed a map in 2023 that still only had one minority district, right? So the image that we saw is what they ended up having to come up with after this. So they had one minority district, and while increasing the minority representation in the other, the map was challenged. A lower federal court ruled it still violated the Voting Rights Act, placing an injunction on the map. The injunction was upheld by the Supreme Court. However, in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision in Louisiana versus Callius, which is the decision from the other week, which significantly weakened the use of the Voting Rights Act in assessing racial gerrymandering, the state was able to gain a stay of the injunction from 2023. And now that means that they can go back to the map that only has the one district versus the 2. So that's Virginia. But the thing is also, as soon as we saw the judgment with Louisiana, the other states that wanted to be difficult all jumped on board right away. Because then we get Tennessee and Alabama, right? Tennessee decided they need to get rid of that one district that they have because that's a racial gerrymander district as well, too. What they're doing is they're making the argument that these districts that are aimed at trying to make sure that black voter representation is there, they're saying that no, that is racist. That goes against the Constitution. You can only build these districts based on like political equity as far as a balance of the parties, but not by race. When in reality, the reason you had to create what was there was because all the districts were drawn by race, and they oftentimes would concentrate black folks into one area and leave it at that. And so the other thing that you've been seeing is now with a lot of districts too as well, if you see what they did to the district in Tennessee, which was Memphis, they broke the city of Memphis into 3 different sections to dilute the black vote, where yes, they have power in that district as one cohesive unit, but when you split it into 3 sections, and now it's diluted with the white voters in these different areas, the black vote is not as strong. And that's what's kind of happening in all these different states as they're redrawing all these different districts. And then you have Alabama. Can we go and talk Alabama for one quick second? Actually, I'm going to pull up a piece of the Alabama story. Is that what I want? Yes. Alabama, where you at? All right. I'm probably not going to read the whole thing. I just need to get the nugget that I need to keep this conversation going. Okay. Supreme Court halts order on Alabama's U.S. House, giving the GOP an opening to gain seats. Now, we covered this story a few years back with this case. Remember, Alabama, it was determined that they had a map that needed to be redrawn because it did not fully represent the people properly. So then the state of Alabama said, we'll draw a map. And they drew a map. But the map still didn't meet the requirements. So they got in trouble. And then it was like, no, y'all got you. Get in there and fix that map. So we were in getting there and fix that map space. And then boom, here comes a lawsuit. And then boom, now we have this current judgment as a way to kind of shut down the order that was there to, utilize the updated map that would have been in compliance. But instead, it doesn't matter because they just found a way to get that too. The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday set the stage for Alabama to eliminate one of two largely black congressional districts before this year's midterm elections, creating an opening for Republicans to gain an additional U.S. House seat in a partisan battle for control of the closely divided chamber. The decision follows a Supreme Court ruling in April that struck down a majority black U.S. House district in Louisiana as an unconstitutional racial gerrymander, significantly weakening the provision of the Federal Voting Rights Act. Alabama officials had pointed to the Louisiana case as a reason for the Supreme Court to end a judicial order to use a court-imposed House map until after the 2030 census. The High Court on Monday overturned that order and directed a lower court to reconsider the case in light of the Louisiana decision. That could free the state to instead use a map approved in 2023 by Republican-led legislatures that include only one district where black residents comprise a large majority. I'll stop there. What's crazy with Alabama's primaries are next week. Their primaries on the 19th, next Tuesday, right? You got states. Remember how I said white folk, you had the dog walk them into compliance? The minute the opportunity came to undo any progress that was created as a result of the Voting Rights Act and as a result of any kind of policy or law that was put into place to ensure that black voters were not disenfranchised, the minute there was an opportunity to play dumb again, or all of a sudden become a genius and find ways to go through every kind of loophole to invalidate those laws, look at the leadership and how quickly they did it. White folks are not budging. When I tell you they are going to do everything in their power to get exactly what it is that they want, I need you to take note. Then we look at a place like Virginia, right? Virginia, the people vote. They say, hey, yeah, redraw. We good. Let's do it. What ends up happening? Virginia State Supreme Court says, "Oh no, that no, you can't do that. No. That's not going to fly." And so at the moment, literally, like as we speak, representatives from Virginia are trying to convince the Supreme Court to take on this case because their argument is, listen, there have been states that didn't even include the voters, and the leadership just drew out their own maps and pushed them through, and now they're law. We actually had an election and allowed the people to vote on what it is that they want. The people have spoken, and now our state Supreme Court is throwing out the results of our election and saying no. So we need you to, again, the same grace, not even grace, but the same privilege you gave Texas, this is what Virginia needs, right? And so that's kind of where they're at. Now, I'll say what's interesting now with Virginia, one thing that's a little bit different, because they're saying that it has to be a legislative thing. It can't be the people. So that also means that Abigail Steinberger, if she wants to, she can redraw the maps herself and then push them through her state legislature. And the Democrats do run the state house in Virginia. But that too would also end up in the courts just because, a mess. So the other thing that's also very interesting is then we also have to talk about Alito, the Supreme Court justice, right? I want to read a piece, and you're going to see that there's a certain theme that you still see even in his statements that we've heard from Roberts. Right? So let me pull up that. All right. Make sure y'all can see. Lovely. Samuel Alito cited for fudged data in his ruling gutting the Voting Rights Act. So literally as he made this ruling to gut Section 2A of the Voting Rights Act, or at least reinterpret it, his information that he utilized as a basis for his judgment wasn't even accurate. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito relied on misleading data to support his ruling decimating the Voting Rights Act. In the court's majority opinion, Alito claimed that the kind of racial discrimination that had prompted the creation of the Voting Rights Act no longer existed. Imagine the audacity of saying that in 2026. Black voters now participate in elections at similar rates as the rest of the electorate, even turning out at higher rates than white voters in 2 of the 5 most recent presidential elections nationwide and in Louisiana, Alito wrote. He was citing a friend of the court's brief submitted by the Department of Justice, which relied on statistical methodology that is not preferred by experts in determining statewide voter turnout. The brief calculated black and white voter turnout in Louisiana as a proportion of the total population of each racial group over the age of 18. This is generally considered a suboptimal method because it includes people who can't vote, including non-citizens and people with felony convictions. Experts typically prefer to consider voter turnout as a proportion of the citizen voting age population or the eligible population. Using this methodology, The Guardian determined that black voter turnout in Louisiana only exceeded white voter turnout in the 2012 presidential election. Using the Department of Justice's data, Alito also alluded the fact that the racial voter gap is actually widening. In the 3 most recent presidential elections since Barack Obama was on the ballot, black voter turnout has trailed white voter turnout, according to the Guardian's analysis. In Louisiana, the disparity grew wider between 2016, 2020, and 2024. Kevin Morris, a researcher at the Brennan Center for Justice, said that Alito's claim is simply not factual and that the turnout gap had exploded over the last 3 years. Michael McDonald, a leading expert on voter turnout who teaches at the University of Florida, told The Guardian that relying on this misleading methodology was purposeful. If I wanted to manipulate the numbers in a way that was favorable to the government's interest, I would be using voting age population, McDonald said. That they had to fudge how they were calculating the turnout rate to get there, and they're not even taking into account the margin of error and all these other methodology issues about current population survey to arrive at that number, he said. Someone knew what they were doing. The Supreme Court's ruling on Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act has opened the door for redistricting efforts across the country as Republicans rush to redraw Democrat-led districts, many of which have black majority populations. So, remember that time how I said people, when they have a vendetta, they will find ways to utilize facts to try to work against you. Like one of the stats that you've always heard people say, especially white folks, when it comes to slavery, they love to use that thing where they let me see, what's the number? I don't remember the actual number, but they always say, oh, well, only whatever percent of white people own slaves. It's like a really low number, something like under 20%. And they would be like, well, why do white people have to atone for that? And then it's like, now we got to break down the numbers. Actually, I want to actually get the actual quote because I don't want to build a whole argument and then I don't even got the right number. Give me 1 second. Let's see here. Let's see. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, 1.4%. That's what they love to use. They love to say that 1.4%, when in reality it's more like a 20 to 30% of households. But anyway, okay, so they'll say that percentage, right? They'll always say, oh, it's there's only this many people that own slaves, but what they will not add to the conversation is the context of what that actually means. So let's just break down that argument really, really quick. One, if we're having a conversation of the amount of people who technically owned people during that time period during slavery, automatically you have to only start with the states where slavery was actually allowed, right? So the states where slavery was abolished, that's not a part of the conversation. So you must now take out that white sample size out of the conversation because they're not eligible to own slaves in a New York or in a Pennsylvania and all this stuff by the time we get to the 1860s. You take that piece out of the equation. Then we take the conversation of households. If I am Jim Bob Thornton and I have my plantation and I have a household of 6 or 7 kids plus my wife, and there's this plantation, I don't know, the plantation got, I don't know, a dozen people who, are enslaved on it. When I do the census and when I put in that conversation of ownership, the only name that's going to go on the ownership of those who are enslaved is going to be me, Jim Bob Thornton. But the reality is, when we're talking about the owner, it's the entire family because the wife has access and gets all the services of what it is that the people on the plantation are doing, plus the 8 kids. And so you have that conversation where people start to dilute the conversation around household. Because again, if you put the owner, like think about like the owner of a house. If you're somebody with 6 or 7 kids, on the deed and everything, it doesn't have you, the spouse, and all the kids. It's maybe just you and the spouse, or maybe it's just the spouse, or maybe it's just you. So there's that conversation when we're talking the numbers and percentages. And then when you get to the percentages of people who, yes, there's some people who did not technically own anybody because they couldn't afford it. But you know what? They worked on the plantations. They were the overseers. They were the people that made sure all these different things were upheld. So they still benefited from the system. And then when you take into account the people that also stayed in positions of power or worked in positions of power to ensure that that system stayed in place, whether they were slave catchers, whether they were people who upheld the law and made sure that, the fugitive slave laws or the Runaway Slave Act, all that kind of stuff. So again, people will give you some random number and try to speak in absolutes and end the conversation. I'm like, pause for the cause. If we're gonna have that conversation, let's really have it. And so what Alito did is exactly that. He tried to pull one of them 1.4% little number things, and his numbers don't even add up with the right context. So you've literally had a Supreme Court justice make a pivotal decision that will affect all of us based on intentional disinformation. He knew that information was some BS and still utilized it as his reasoning to make his decision. And what did you hear him say? He went and stated that, again, racism doesn't exist. It's over with. This is after the re-election of a white nationalist. And again, Trump ain't the first white nationalist to be president. But again, I'm going to harp on him because he's the one that's in power. And again, when you look at what all of his energy has gone into, which demographic of people has he gone after? Everybody except straight white men. So all of the executive orders against DEI, everything that's going on with pretty much you allowing ICE to not even just do what they do, but you can even discriminate while you do it. Every racist element of what is taking place is so blatantly in our faces that you can't even deny it anymore. The illusion of being a post-racial society that people used to try to push and get away with back in the early 2000s and even early 2010s, you haven't heard anybody use that language in a good minute because everybody understands there's nothing post-racial about what's happening right now. But you have Alito, who has literally just used that as his justification in the same way that Robert said things weren't that bad. In the same way that when we go back to the beginning of this entire segment, when I had to talk about the Enforcement Act 1, 2, and 3, how folks kept trying to be like, oh, it's not that bad, or oh, y'all just read it wrong, and you had to keep adding more laws to get stuff right. That is where we are at. And folks are playing in faces right now. Let's see. It kind of goes back to, and I have to make a correction because I kept saying the wrong person. I kept saying Russell Vought, and it wasn't him. So apologies for that. But I've been saying for a few lies about, I meant to say Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation, one of the founders of Project 2025. You know, I love that this story is finally like hitting all of social media and people are discovering that one of the founders of Project 2025 has a whole PhD in African American studies with a specific concentration on slavery and what was happening in Louisiana and Virginia. I need y'all to understand, and can we just talk about that? You went to the university level, you have a whole PhD in the plight of Black Americans. You learned everything there is to know about how slavery went down. You learned everything there is to know about the atrocities that took place, the people that died, the people that suffered, the people that were disenfranchised, how the acts of slavery affect us today, and how that disproportionately affects Black people in a negative way, and how that led into everything else that would come afterwards, whether it was redlining or housing discrimination or job discrimination or sharecropping or convict leasing or the flaws in the judicial system or the flaws in the prison industrial complex or the nadir period or the flaws when it comes to healthcare and the discriminatory practices when it comes to Black maternal health, all of these different things. And so you studied all that. And after all of that, you still have an obsession with us. That's a different level of hatred. Like, you really got to be pressed. Because again, first of all, college is not even easy to begin with, right? You not only, did your little undergrad thing, but you went and got a whole doctorate. You dedicated at least 5 to 7 years of study and research and discourse. And after learning everything that you learned, because this whole dissertation was about the systems either in Louisiana or Virginia, after going through all of that and seeing blatantly all the ills of the world and all the ills of the United States and all the ills that have taken place against Black Americans, and the fact that up until recently, Black Americans and Native Americans were the only two groups of people that were specifically targeted by the federal government for pretty much just extermination, pretty much, right? With all of that, you still were like, I want to do more, but I want to do more to disrupt, not to redeem or not to remedy. And so these are the kind of folks that you're sharing a space with, right? These are the kind of folks that are calling the shots. And so when I keep hearing people always say like, oh, Calvin, you're doing too much, it ain't that deep. It's always been that deep. And I mean, if you follow me for a long time, we've been having these conversations forever in a day. I ain't ever really switched up too much. I like that it's easier to have these conversations now because now people are really seeing it. But understand, these were not easy conversations to have in like 2012, 2013, in those early years when I had this channel, because folks you almost lose your mind because you're trying to get people to see the bigger picture, and people are only living in the moment or living in a surface level understanding of different things, and they don't want to learn anything else. And so they either fight you on it and you look crazy. So now we fast forward and all this stuff is happening, and now it's like, now I'm being bombarded by almost the same people who are like, Calvin, what do we do? And it's like, well, I All right, well, let's press through. At least you trying to do the change. But the point that I want to make is their work is never done, and you can never get comfortable. And that's one of the things we've been saying. It's not just me. It's I think anybody who has discernment and anybody who has a similar platform who's been having these conversations, they've all been saying the same thing. This is not the time to get comfortable. It's one of the reasons why I always push back on symbolism, because I always say symbolism gives the idea that the work is done and we've moved on. When you hear people always talk about symbolism, it's always talking about how far we've come or what we've come from. And I'm like, but the job is never done, right? It goes back to that analogy I gave of the symbolism train, where if we all got on a train and the final destination would have everything we've ever desired, right? There's the liberation. You don't got to deal with the racism. You don't got to deal with all the things that are wrong with society. But on that train on the way there, when you get on a train and you go somewhere, you're going to stop in different cities. Picture every stop is a symbolism nugget. You're on the train, and then the first stop is, the first Black person to win album of the year. That's not a dig at Beyonce. I'm just talking about entertainment, right? People are going to get off the train at that because that's symbolism. Yeah, we won that. And then the train keeps going, and another symbolism nugget. The politicians took a knee and wore a kente cloth, right? And then everybody get off and go over there and celebrate with them. And what ends up happening is by the time you get to that final destination, so many people have jumped off the train and got off at symbolism nuggets and never got to what it is they actually wanted. They got off at something when they got comfortable. They got off at something when they thought, well, this will do. I'll take this. It's not really what I asked for. It's not what I want, but I'll take this, and this is fine, right? They got off when they thought, I don't want to do the work anymore. This is good enough for me, right? And so that's kind of one of the things that we've kind of been just seeing. And I just want y'all to realize just how how our politics, when we're talking about the conversation of the long haul, how things can really change and shift over time. And when you only live in the moment, you sometimes don't realize just how wild things can really shift. I want to highlight, let me open these. I found this, somebody had this post. We're going to go to 1990 and just look at some of these different districts. First, let me pull up, what state is this? This is, all right, Tennessee. Let me pull up Tennessee in 2026 real quick. 2026 voter district by party. All right. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna share my screen real quick. I'm saying real quick, like we ain't been on here for 2 hours. All right. Where is my oh, I gotta open it here. Sorry, wrong thing. Give me 1 sec. Just gotta get this right. There we go. Yes. This is what I want. All right, let's try this again. Okay. This is Tennessee currently, right? When we're looking at the districts that are there, look at how red Tennessee is. Now, this right here is the district that they have gotten rid of the other week. This is where you've had all the protests and everything. Shout out to Justin Pearson and Justin Jones too. Justin Pearson, I enjoyed that clip where you called that sheriff boy. I was like, that's right. It gives them a taste of their own medicine, right? This is Tennessee in 2026 as far as the districts and how people move politically. Now, let's go to 1990. Do you see how much of a contrast the politics have become? A lot of what has happened as far as the states becoming more red was not because everybody just all of a sudden fell in love with Republicans. It was the racial gerrymandering that took place. They gerrymandered because, again, every time there's a new governor, they get to redraw the district when it's the census year. And so we ended up getting that. I'm going to keep going because then it's the same thing. Look at Texas. This is Texas in 1990. All that blue. What Texas do you know looks like that right now? Louisiana. Let's go to them. I'm on the wrong thing. Boom. Let's go to Louisiana. Do y'all see the point that I make? When I'm saying this conversation of being for the long haul and not in the moment, these right here couldn't have got to the red that they are now in one election cycle. Couldn't have got to the red that they are now in the snap of a finger. Some of this stuff is going to take years, right? And that's kind of the point that I want to get at, is like, people got to understand that your vote actually does carry weight. Why do you think they're going so hard right now? Because I know there's a lot of folks who are like, I don't vote. It's all rigged. Because I've even seen some people say, like, even with the redistricting, the redrawing of the maps, like, that should tell you why the votes are done. We should just quit. It's done. The reality is this: if we're looking at the long-term picture, no matter what happens with the districts at the state level, you're always going to vote for a new governor every 4 years. And again, who draws the districts? So let's just say it's a shit show right now. Let's just say it ain't looking too good. The promise that is there is that eventually there's going to be a new governor. That new governor in these different states gets to draw those maps. And if you've done your part as that person who votes at your state level, and you make sure that your state legislature has a house and the upper chamber or the lower chamber in the same political party that you're affiliated with, then hell, they'll push through exactly what it is that you voted for. So, and again, I'm not trying to be the advocate, but understand a lot of what we're in as well is a result of people just not showing up. I'm not even going to whack a lot of these states that we've covered, but some of these states have had voter turnouts that were so low, which very disappointed. It disappointed me because, boy, there was one state that we harped on for a lot of their statewide elections, and the people still ain't show up. I'm like, damn, y'all don't listen. And now here we are. Now we got to do more damage control. And I'm just going to say this before I go to the chat. All right. I keep hearing people sometimes they'll criticize my viewpoints and say you keep painting the Democrats to be the heroes. And I want to correct that. The Democrats are not our heroes. They are not going to liberate us. But at the same time, are you going to be foolish enough to allow those who are I just literally introduced you to a person who spent 7 years in school studying your history to figure out how to oppress you. And he's currently, Heritage Foundation member. Heritage Foundation been in the way for years. In addition to that, Project 2025. It's not about a hero. It's not about, falling in love with the party or anything, but it's understanding the conversation of harm reduction and who has your best interest and who doesn't. And I always say, sometimes you got to look at this like an hourglass. You know how when you get that hourglass and you flip it, that little bit of sand, it squeezes through. You got all the time in the world for stuff to come down. Let's use this as an analogy. Let's say that we have 2 hourglasses. Actually, let me rephrase. You have an hourglass. And let's say everything you want in life is at the top of that glass. Everything. This is liberation. This is reparations. This is clean water. This is good schools. This is clean air. This is an affordable cost of living. You can actually afford to have a child. You can have good health care and not have to pay a crazy copay just to get a consultation for them to not even do anything. You can go to the dentist and actually get cosmetic work, and the insurance will actually cover it instead of trying to put you on some kind of payment plan that you didn't actually be on. You went in for a cleaning, and now they're telling you they got to realign your jaw and pull 4 teeth, right? This is, you live in a safe space where you don't have to worry about some mass shooter coming and blowing up everybody and everything every 5 minutes, right? You live in a space where the consumer is protected and you're not at the mercy of greedy corporate billionaires who just want to keep ruining everything, right? All of that is sitting in the top of that hourglass. Now, if I were to make this symbolic about the 2 parties right now, to me, and let's say this, if you're not careful, everything that falls to the bottom of that hourglass, once it falls, it's done. You lose it. It gets in the hands of the people who want the worst for you. It gets into the hands of the people who don't F with you, right? If I were to break this up by like party right now, and I'm speaking specifically for just 2026 of where we're at right now. And again, this is not painting anybody to be a hero. This is a conversation of harm reduction. If I'm looking at how Democrats are, what's going on with the Democrats right now, to me, Democrats are the regular hourglass. It's the sand is falling. You're losing stuff. They're moving and trying to fix stuff, but they ain't moving as fast as I would like them to. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they just don't have the power that they could have had because people didn't show up. That's the Democrat hourglass. But you know what? You still at least have the luxury of time. You got an hour to figure it out. So there's an hour to figure out how to slow down the sand. If there was a Republican hourglass, they found a way to crack the little middle piece so the sand can come out a little bit faster. So that the way that this stuff is going, you got about 6 minutes to figure it out before everything that you wanted at the top ends up at the bottom and gets destroyed and everything you ever wanted is gone. That's the way Republicans are moving right now. And that's why when people try to say, like, none of this matters, if none of this mattered, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. If none of this mattered, Alabama wouldn't have broken their necks to try to redraw their district maps while they have an election next week. Louisiana wouldn't have tried to cancel their primaries in order to redraw their maps. Texas would have been pressed to go and try to redraw their maps and screw everybody over. Tennessee would have been pressed to get with a... Hold on, let me pull that back up because that should actually trigger you. I'm going to pull that back up. We need to sit with this for a second. This little tiny piece of a district, little piece here. Now, we do know with districts, we've done a whole video on that. Go back and watch my live where we talk about the census. We know that each district actually has the same amount of people in the population. That's the one law about the districting. Every district must have the same populace as far as the amount of people. But this one district somehow got all these people mad that we got to get rid of it. And boom, this is what we get. Like I said, they diluted that and split it into 3 sections. So this whole Memphis area is now split into 3 regions. If voting didn't matter, they wouldn't be doing all of this. And even if we just get outside of it and we just talk about where we're at now, by people choosing to stay home or being pissed with the options that were there, unemployment all over the place, inflation, the highest it's been since 2023. We're in Iran doing Lord knows what, and we're not winning, right? The president even said today he does not care about how this war is a financial burden on any of us. All he cares about is Iran not getting a nuclear weapon, which, again, had people paid attention, there was already a deal that was in place. He decided to gut it and ruin it, and there we are. You got that going on, right? We literally are at the risk of whatever this new virus is, that you're praying that it doesn't become something, but this is just the worst timing because the CDC has been gutted. Even the segment of the CDC that specifically deals with outbreaks on cruise ships and planes and warehouses has been dismantled. So that's not even there. HHS, all the HHS agencies that focus on this kind of stuff have all been gutted. So whether that's the agencies at the NIH, whether that's the CDC, even things like what's happening with the FDA and all these different places, all the stuff is gutted. So when we're talking about the safety of just our food or the safety of what to do in the event that this new virus spreads, we don't even have leadership to handle it. We don't even have the scientists to go and do the work. We're now at the mercy of whatever the rest of the world is doing. But even with that, we're out of the WHO, right? We're not a part of the WHO anymore. So, we're not even tied into anything. And so the piece is, I just want people to get, is all of this matters, and it always has mattered, right? That's all I can say. Like, I think for me, sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, it does get a little triggering when, like, if I see a subscriber that I know has been watching for years and they're still saying, well, that's why I just don't vote. I'm like, you realize you got me just out here spewing hot air. And if I've been talking to you for 10 years and you still ain't budging, think of your grandmother. That's all I'm saying. All right. I want to pause and read some comments and then we'll kind of shift. I had other topics, but it's already getting late here, but we'll just chop it up. I know I missed a lot of the comments, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to scroll back up to the comments in a few minutes, but first I actually have it at the very bottom of the chat. So for whatever comments you want to get in now, this is the perfect time because I will actually see it. And then I'm going to actually scroll back up and read some of the previous comments. So I'm going to read exactly what's coming in as it comes in. LSCRA 13, Calvin, thank you so much for being consistent over the years. I just thank y'all for not making me feel like I'm crazy and losing it, because it's I'm not gonna lie, it gets draining doing this, because sometimes I want to talk about some fun stuff. I want to laugh too. It's kind of like what's his name in Baps when he's like, how come you gotta wear your Sunday clothes on Wednesday? How come we gotta go to the restaurant and watch everybody else eat? Hell, I want to eat too. I want to laugh too, right? Somebody said, thank you for talking about the people who didn't vote and voted from the cows. The left undermined itself by not getting our representatives in place. And I'll say, with the voting, there's so many layers. It's not a one size fits all conversation, but I just want people to at least get active, right? I can't tell you who to vote for and what you should vote for, but I can tell you what you're up against and what people want to do. But when people don't even try, and I'm trying to give some grace, because I think back to when I was first eligible to vote. I didn't vote in the first election I could have voted in. I was old enough to vote in the 2006 midterms because I had just turned 18. And I remember even being at Howard. I remember them calling a dorm meeting because we were in Drew Hall. This was the all-male dorm. They had us in this big old room and they lectured us for a good hour about this is the most important election, because this really was one, because they were trying to pull Congress from Bush. That way, if he could lose the chambers of the House, then he couldn't do anything else to mess up stuff, right? And I remember sitting there and getting all the lecture, and I was kind of like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna get to it when I get to it. But I didn't realize, because I didn't really follow up, that the election was like the next week, or I forgot when it was. But either way, I missed it. And so I always try to look at it that way, like, you know what? There's some people who just don't know what they don't know. And there's some people who are so far removed from what's happening that you just have to keep trying your best to inform them. And God willing, they will figure it out. Because of course, by the time we got to the next election, my first election I voted in was the 2008 presidential election. Then it was on and popping since then. So yeah, I just need people to get active. While we're sitting here getting comfortable and acting like stuff ain't a big deal, these white folks been out here plotting for years to the point where people are getting whole PhDs in your history to figure out how to oppress you even faster. Doing that and figuring out, okay, I've learned all of your resistance methods. I've learned all the things you tried to do and what worked. And that probably explains why when you saw that document, once we got into 2020, once we got into the Project 2025 era, and they had those list of terms that were banned for any kind of grant application when it came to federal. Remember that list of words we went through? It was like every word you could think of. It wasn't just black, white, LGBTQ plus. It wasn't it was equity, like all the words: disenfranchised, underserved, food desert, imminent victims of eminent domain, victims of heirs land legislation, like all the kind of things that only somebody who's done the research would understand. Like, and when you saw that list was pages upon pages upon pages upon pages upon pages. Or think about like 2 lives ago when we went through just a list of some of the programs that were cut. You had people who broke the research that has gone into oppressing folks is crazy. So you got to know what world you're living in. And to me, like I said, a vote is just a vote. It's a real quick, you go in there, you check the box and you bounce. I don't know why we're making it seem like it's a marriage. Like we just went through this whole thing where you saw the people had to pay $79.19 just to register to vote. We get to do it for free and people going off about it. You got an attitude about doing something for free for your own livelihood, right? Anyway, let's keep going. Calvin, what do you think of Amanda Seale's video on Instagram regarding voting? I don't follow her. I'm sorry. I don't even know what she said. You'd have to enlighten me in the chat. Let's see. Misty said, it's like we say, Calvin, Dems, Republicans, doesn't matter. Democrats could have passed the John Lewis voting bill when they had the majority. Hell, Biden could have used executive orders, nothing for blacks. Okay, so my thing with that, too, at this point, people fought me when we were having a reparations conversation, and I kept saying a conversation of reparations is never going to happen in this country if the country is not well. Now we're in a space where the country is not well. The country has no money for anything, where they're starting to rob Peter to pay Paul to pay for this war. So something like a reparations falls further down the list of reality when it comes to all the things that are going to need to get fixed once this crazy man is out of office, right? We're $39 trillion in debt, and we're going to be even more in debt. This was a war that was supposed to last 2 weeks. We're now a few months into the war, and it's nowhere near ending. The last live, we went over the $1 trillion proposed budget, and we saw everything that was going to be cut. And so I get the conversation of wanting to fight for ours and what we deserve and what should be ours. And I feel like we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I think, one, yes, call out the ones who ain't doing right by us. Yes, hold people accountable in the moments where it's appropriate and not detrimental to your own collective. But at the same time, I think we have to sometimes be realistic about what the landscape looks like in that moment, kind of. You know what I mean? I will also say, to your point, now with these districts that are going to start getting redrawn, a lot of these black people in the House, a lot of these people are going to lose their seats. They're going to get drawn out of their seats. And so a lot of the CBC, some of them are going to be gone. And I think for some people who have really paid attention to politics, they're going to be like, well, you know what? A lot of them weren't really moving the needle to begin with. I'm not going to say everybody. You got some who just, but I think there's certain conversations to be had. I'm not going to have that one tonight, but yeah. Man. Somebody said the Voting Rights Act doesn't get the same traction as abortion. I don't think they're in the same. They live in two different worlds for me. That's what I would say to that. But I do see women's rights or women's reproductive rights also under attack as well, though. That's always been a thing too. Let's see. Somebody said, take care of us for our tax rate when we pay a low rate for medical expenses. Somebody said, we can break through the... Oh, see, this is the right energy, Jana. We can break through the gerrymandering if more people get out and vote. IDK, what's more... I don't know what's more encouragement. I don't know what more encouragement people need besides seeing how the government is moving. Thank you for that. I meant to bring that up too. Like, also remember, we had 90 million people stay home. in 2024. Just like I was saying with the Jasmine Crockett primary, even though I still feel exactly the same way, but I feel like a part of this has to be about exciting and pulling the non-voter. If you can get more of the non-voters to show up, that changes so much. Really, you have 30% of the country that's making the decisions for the other 60% based on the results of 2024. That's the reality. 30% of the country is determining what the rest of us are dealing with or living under. And if you can get more people to kind of lock in, so even these gerrymandered districts, like Jan was saying, we have some precincts and districts where Black voter turnout is under 20%. Right? And I will also say, thank you, Jan, for bringing that up, because I just thought about that too. One of the things that these folks did not think about as they started redrawing these districts and trying to dilute the Black vote and push Black voters into whiter districts is that those whiter districts are not going to have the same power and pull that they once had to continue electing these crazy extremist politicians, because now their vote is going to, I'm not going to say be diluted, but you're going to have more of the Black vote to kind of combat what it is that they're pushing against, which is going to be very interesting for like primaries and caucuses and everything else like that. So there are some things to kind of look through. I'm definitely somebody who's not a doom and gloom, woe is me, I give up, I don't know what we going to do. I ain't got time. Y'all supposed to have some fight in you. We be having more fight at Chipotle when they don't put enough chicken in the bowl than we do with our own politics. So nope. Jan, that's the right energy. Missy Flame said, I appreciate your dedication over the years to put things in historical context. It helps me feel sane when coming across foolishness. It's that, and then I do apologize, y'all, because I know I am not as frequent on this channel as much. I know I try to do a live like every week and a half, but at the same time, with all this going on, I told y'all, I am living life. Like nobody is stealing my joy. I will be locked in. I will do the work, but I'm also going to live and not just sit and saturate in all the craziness that is. Because at some point, we will come out of the other side at some point. So in the meantime, I got to be at my best. So when we come out the other side, I can actually be healthy enough to enjoy it. Let's see. Saba 722 said Virginia just needs to use the new maps anyway. That's what I would do, because the Republicans are doing whatever they want to do. Nobody's following the law anyway. So if y'all gonna not follow the law, we ain't gonna follow it either. And technically, we're within the law. Like, that's how I would move. Let's see. Somebody said we got to lock in more than ever. Cheekbones, I'm so late. How you been? Belize gal, what up? Look, Belize gal, we must be doing good, because you ain't even dragged my fave in like a year. We must be real good right now. Normally she be whacking my favorite artists, but I'm good. Belize gal, you got a place for us to go. Oh, I was gonna say that too, because I know a lot of the conversation too is always people are talking about like maybe it's time to just leave the country. And I'm always one saying, well, I ain't really trying to go nowhere yet. However, I do think you want to have multiple options. I think, because I'll say this, for those who are like, F America, I'm out, more power to you. I understand, protect your peace. But the reality is, if there are not people who are still here to combat and slow down the foolery of the United States and their imperialism, the imperialism of the United States will still show up at the shores of wherever you move to. So that's why I feel like we're needed in both places. But yeah, do what makes you sane. I know I got my passport just in case. And listen, if some of y'all go and set up shop somewhere, when you got all settled, let me know. If it's a country that got a nice beach and some great seafood, I'll be there. Yeah. Somebody said respectability politics is horse-ish. Let's be with the ish. Fight for what's right. Exactly. I am over the trying to still sugarcoat and talk in circles. And this is why I get annoyed with moderates. And this is why even with like a lot of white liberals and white politicians, I have to look at real sideways sometimes. Oh, there's Avocado Queen. You were who I was thinking about when I was saying the piece about leaving the country. But yeah, a lot of them, I can't deal with folks who still straddle the fence on that kind of stuff. Because to me, the reality is a lot of these folks at the end of the day are still white people, right? No matter how decent some of them may present themselves to be, or how much they may be down with the fight, a lot of times there's still moments where they have the blinders of whiteness that get in the way. And a lot of times it's that respectability politics. It's people trying to tell you how to protest or how to respond or how to say and how to do things. There's no time for that. I'm sorry. We're not. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any plans to go anywhere anytime soon. But I mean, for people who want to, more power to you. You do your thing across there. I'm gonna do my thing over here, and because I think the next, really, the bigger conversation is, I think Black people collectively are gonna have to understand that, seeing how easy it was for the federal government to strip away the livelihood for a lot of us when it comes to services, guardrails, even federal employment and stuff, right? How that's just affected so many people. The question becomes, well, what is it that Black people can create that gets Black people in a capacity where they don't have to depend on the guardrails? And I'm not talking about the social service programs. That's one piece. I'm just talking about in general, like what ends up happening. So, like, an example would be, the federal government, unfortunately, a lot of the grants that they give out have been stripped because of the current president. And so grants that were designed to help different nonprofits and organizations and services, everything is getting cut. So the question becomes, well, how do you build to create a space where you're not 100% dependent on that? And I think right now, Black folks have to start collectively learning to affect international commerce and building coalitions outside of the United States. Because right now, the United States can't be trusted with anybody's livelihood. Um, and that's why there's certain viewpoints that some people have that I don't 100% agree with, because I still believe in the idea of collaboration, and I believe in the idea of building with folks across the diaspora in order to get things. And again, where everybody's on their journey, everybody ain't got it together, we all struggling. You're going to get further along trying to build together than trying to be 100% isolated and F you and F this and you ain't this and you ain't of that. Waste of time. Anyway, and like an example I would say is, like, think about like hair care, right? Think about how those beauty supply stores, a lot of times for the longest, Black owned beauty supply stores, a lot of times had hard times getting inventory because the magazines that they would order wholesale from were 100% written in Korean, and Korean distributors would not sell to them on purpose because they're not trying to support the Black business. They're trying to have their own Korean owned hair beauty supply plus stores. But then you see, like, you're starting to get into a space where a lot of Black business owners that have their own beauty supply stores, they're doing business with companies outside of the United States and connecting with other groups to get their inventory, or they're searching within, right? It's kind of like a Bonner Brothers type thing where okay, we're gonna do it in house. We're gonna find our own way. So it's like you got all that kind of stuff going on. Now, it's not saying everything has to be kumbaya and we are the world, but at some point you're gonna have to realize right now this is not the time to trust the United States with anything until this current administration is out. Even when this administration is out, you gotta cut the weeds, the roots, all of that. A lot of people gotta go. Sorry, they got to go. So there's that. Let's see. Tyler said white moderates have been complicit in the rise of fascism. Hey, where's the No Kings people at? I ain't heard them say nothing about the Voting Rights Act. Actually, a lot of people who've been going off about everything been real silent on this one. Real silent. I'm like, where y'all at? Any other time, y'all be putting on the dinosaur costume and be ready to go. T-Rex and ready to march. Silence. Okay, I'm gonna actually scroll back up because I want to make sure I get at least some of these comments, because I definitely just was on a soapbox for a good hour. So I'm not gonna be able to get to every comment, of course. I will let you know when I scroll back down to the bottom for anybody who wants to get me in real time. Tyson Beauty said, I'll always fight, but I can't help but think we are doomed. I don't think it's that we're doomed. Okay, when I look at doomed to me is there is absolutely no light at the end of the tunnel. There's absolutely no solution. Everything is 100% locked in, and it is what it is. That's not necessarily the case with what's happening right now. First of all, the Trump administration, these are some of the most incompetent people. Like, literally, the only thing working in their favor right now is the racism. But they can't even do that right. And you're watching their stuff just fall apart anyway. So let them dig themselves into the hole that they're in. So that's why I'm kind of like, I wouldn't say doomed. I think we're not in a good place, and there's work to be done, and it's not going to be a pretty sight. And like I've been saying for years, we might have to be okay with the fact that everything we're fighting for may not 100% happen in our lifetime, but at least we might be able, not even might, but at least we can set up a world where our children will have everything it is that we fought for. Now we're moving so far backwards. The stuff that our grandparents and great grandparents fought for has now been lost. And now we got to fight to get that back. But this is why I keep saying this is, to me, it's a long haul conversation. And that's where that conversation of community keeps coming in. It might not be everything you want within your specific lifetime, but I know if I had children, I wouldn't want to just sit here and lay down and die and then leave it to them to deal with. You know what I mean? I would. It's even like with the kids I work with. I love that so many of them are doing so well. I mean, I have kids at this point that have doctorates. Yeah, I mean, I have kids that are more educated than me. I got one kid. If you listen to the podcast, Clarissa graduates from college next year, right? Which is crazy. And Clarissa is killing the game. Clarissa has been flown out by Forbes, TikTok. She's in Spain right now on some panels. Like that girl got to her school and just blew the shit out the water. That doesn't sound like a great term, but like when I tell you, I'm just so impressed, and I love that. You know, she'll call every now and then, like, Mr. Michael, I just need advice real quick. But to see that she was already going to be great, whether I was in her life or not, but seeing that I got to be a part of that journey and I've watched her take some of the advice that I gave and her just run with it, and just to see the success, that's one of the best feelings in the world. And that's just one kid. You know, I think I had somewhere between like 400 and 600 kids walk through my doors in those 11 years. And not only just walk and leave, but like literally stayed a full 11 years while I was there. So, you know, I would want to see a role where you keep seeing that thrive, right? And those aren't even my kids. So imagine when I have my own, right? So that's how I kind of look at it. But I fully understand what it feels like with what you're saying, because it is, you got to do, you know, your self-care in this moment, right? Somebody said, "Ooh, as an educator, I love that strategy to teach writing skills and taking notes." And JDG7515 is talking about the analogy I gave with the peanut butter thing. Yo, when I did that with my kids, the first time we did it, I almost started feeling bad because kids were starting to cry because everybody was hungry. So everybody ate, don't worry. But yeah, man, it was like I got one or two kids that was ready to cry, but then I had a lot of kids who were anxious and they wanted to write it again because now they knew what they needed to do. Like that was the cool part, was watching them be excited to do it again. And I was like, okay, well, we'll try again next week. No, Mr. Michael, let's just do it now. Let's just do it now. All right, fine. Because they were going to still get the sandwich anyway. So, like, stuff like that is fun. I really do miss working with the kids every now and then. I was just with Ava because we went down for the graduation, and we were just in that car laughing about all the different silly stories we had and all the stuff the kids used to do. By the way, if people are looking for good news sources, because like I said, right now we can't even trust mainstream media. Like I do not watch CNN or MS Now, or y'all know I don't watch no Fox News. I don't deal with no CBS News. And yeah, I don't really listen to none of them. Like at this point, like I said, I really support Urban View. I think all of them do an excellent job of giving us like the actual facts and the stats and what's going on. Like Larry Daniel Favors, I think, is just brilliant. You know, Clay Kane does his thing. I love Reese Colbert because she cusses, right? Like I love that. I'm like, yes, say it. And Karen Hunter, Shauna Renee. Like if you have XM radio, channel 126, you can get a whole lot of insight. And then some of them also post their stuff on YouTube. Let's see. Where are we at here? Christine said they only want our existence to be part of servitude, not happening. Get over it. And that's where I'm at. Like, I'm not gonna die without kicking. So yeah, I'm not about to just lay there and take it. And that's kind of where I'm at and have always been. And I think when you really are well versed into who you are and your history, and you know what it is that you come from, if anything, you're just more so annoyed with what's happening, and you really just want to kind of kick some faces in, as opposed to feeling like the world is ending, because you know what you can do and why they're doing what they do. And it's that inferiority complex that a lot of them have, right? And they know it. I should have played that clip of Gary Chambers dragging the people in Louisiana, because they know what they're doing, but I feel like we know ourselves even better than what they think they do. They don't know who they are. All they know is racism and hatred and being terrible. And that's literally what they move by. And that's why they can't ever organize and get anything effectively done long term and consistently. It's all over, they're all over the place. But there's that. What up, Order of the Bees? Somebody said Trump has wiped away 70 years of work. He certainly has. And that's why I'm like, it's going to be up to the later generations to fix it. And it's even with politics too. Like I've been saying, we need more people active. I know y'all be like, how won't you do it? And I'm like, I don't want to. But every now and then I be thinking like, maybe I might need to run for something because yeah, somebody got to do something. But yeah, like start locking in and paying attention to who's doing what. We know money has to come out of politics in order for it to really do its thing. But in the meantime, lock in with what's going on locally. Local is the most important right now because a lot of the shenanigans that have been taking place under this current administration was enabled because of guardrails that were not being protected at the local level, right? So many races that were run unopposed, so many positions that have been there and people didn't even know they existed. Like even with the process of certifying an election, most of us had no idea that certifying the presidential election had so many steps, and many of the steps are at the local level. And a lot of those people in the positions that do the certifying are elected. So like run for that stuff. It's 500 right now. It's 511 people in this chat. Somebody in here can run for something, right? Even if it's the school board, even if it got to be your HOA, because you got them racist neighbors that are over here just doing the most and terrorizing the neighborhood. Go ahead and join that HOA to kind of regulate so that your other neighbors can know peace. Y'all can push that Karen out that's doing too much. Okay, let's keep scrolling. Crazy Homebody Girl said the level of hate just needs to be studied. It's crazy. Like I don't get why they're so obsessed with us. I don't wake up thinking about them. When I get up, if I ain't cussing because the alarm clock is rude, I put on my good wake it up music and be in the zone and be trying to figure out what I'm about to eat. And if I'm gonna go get me some coffee or get a tea, and then I'll be like, oh, I make sure I need to call my mama before I go to lunch. So that's where I'm at. Some of these folks go to sleep with us on their mind, pressed. Alan said his first election was 2016. Tyler said his first election was 2020. Somebody said Nick Cannon needs to watch my live. Nick Cannon wouldn't watch this. Lola Bishop, thank you, said, listen, let's talk about Rhythm Nation being inducted into the Hall of Fame. Same problem, same devil. I did see that. Jenna looked very nice at that ceremony, by the way. She looked very, very nice. Rhythm Nation, I'm glad it's getting its flowers. The Grammys played in the Rhythm Nation album's face when I think it only won a Grammy for the music video. And yeah, but they played in her face, but at least they gave her flowers now. Where are we at here? Somebody said, yeah, don't forget your passports before they start putting Cheeto's face on them. Even before that, I'd like, get your passport now because there's no telling what the process will be like. You see, they're finding all kind of ways to make that even harder. So I feel like all of the critical documents and things that you need, get that now. Because also, again, because of Doge and because so many federal employees were laid off and fired, all of these agencies are backlogged. Every last one of them. They are understaffed, backlogged. Stuff is taking longer. You got people doing 2 and 3 people's jobs. So all of that stuff, passports, if you were still like finalizing your citizenship or whatever else you had going with that, or if you were military and you were trying to get your disability once you got out, if you hell, even your tax stuff, if you extended after April and you got till October to get that stuff, and like be on top of all this stuff, because there's no telling what these agencies are going to look like. Avocado Queen said people should work towards residency in another country at a minimum. Okay. Which I agree with on that. If you're somebody who's considering like either doing the dual thing or leaving, and you see there's some people that are so pressed, they were even trying to make it where if you get dual citizenship, then you should lose your American citizenship. You see them trying to do that now where they're trying to even revoke citizenship. They want this to be a white only country. I'm like, y'all, listen, y'all don't realize how down bad y'all gonna be if it's only y'all up in here. You're like, man. Somebody said, hey, this is huge, Calvin. I don't know what's huge. Let me scroll. Maybe there's a context I missed. Julian, I don't know what that's about, but it's the Tyler. Tyler, what did you say, Tyler? Oh, Tyler's graduating college in 2 days. Hey, we love to see it. Sorry, I had to figure out what this was going on. what was going on. Congratulations, Tyler. Now, Tyler has been here. God, Tyler was, I think, in middle school when he started watching these videos. So shout out to you, Tyler. Congratulations. I remember the struggle of getting out of college. Boy, I made it out with just a cap and gown. Just it wasn't no course. It was just I just got out, made it. So congratulations to you, sir. That is lovely. Did I see the Stephen A. Smith interview with Megyn Kelly? Stephen A. Smith does not get to have real estate in my head. Absolutely not, especially not with no Megyn Kelly. But I know that he said some foolishness. And what he needs to do, since he's so pressed about running, Stephen A. Smith, if you're going to run for office, please go and run as a Republican, because that's what you are. That's what you want to be. Please stop infiltrating and trying to pretend that you're an independent or Democrat adjacent. Go and run as a Republican and let them do with you whatever they do. Do that, please. Go and run your white nationalist platform or whatever you want to do, and leave us alone, please. Okay. Oh, that look, everybody graduating. Hold on. Alan said, I have good news. Although I didn't meet my goal on GoFundMe, I was able to find a way and will be in DC graduating from Johns Hopkins on Monday. Look, everybody, look, see, we be winning on this channel, okay? That's why we say community, right? I will always shout out Alan, because Alan was one of the first people to review my very first album. I don't even know if Alan remembers that, but Alan always has his list of like best projects, best songs, and I remember he put my song "Atomic" as one of his like favorites of 2017. Yeah, so it's like you remember folks and stuff, and I love that I've been a part of people's journeys and people have been a part of mine. I love getting the messages where people are like, "Oh, I used to watch you when I was 12." I'm like, hold on now, somebody's lying, because I'm only 24. So y'all need to get this together here. Y'all need to stop aging me up. Miss Smith said, damn, I just lost the spot. Okay. The way they use the Obama's presidency to both pacify the moderates and ignite the extremists is diabolical. No need for affirmative action, DEI, voting rights, but also need a MAGA, but also a need to MAGA. Like, yeah, that man being elected just sometimes I wonder what the U.S. would look like had he not ran. And I'm not saying he shouldn't have. Like, I am grateful. Listen, them Obama years were the best year. First of all, when I was 20, that was the best year ever. Right? That was the first time I saw my favorite concert. I was at Howard having a great time. Freedom from being under my parents. I'm running the streets. And then Obama got elected too. Oh, 2008 was a time. Oh, one of the best years ever. And that was when you're still young and optimistic about the world. And that's when I just remember the night he won, we all were in the streets. It was raining. We were running and singing and parading. You could just high five any random person on the street. Everybody was hyped up. Everybody was honking horns and everything. People were crying. And I remember because it was my little crew we ran with. Me, Tanae, Nick, Whitney. Actually, I don't know if Whitney was there that day. Whitney was with us. Yeah. And a few other folks. And I mean, we were out to like 5 that morning, and none of us made it to class the next day. It was, and the professors were like, you know what, y'all are fine. We get it. It was just in that moment, you finally felt like you had a chance. Even though in the back of our minds, we knew it was going to be some nonsense and they were going to give him a hard time. But just for that night, just and nobody was even anxious. We all knew he was going to win. Like, I think they called it before 11. Right? Even when they called it, I wasn't even in the room at the time. We were having a watch party at the dorm, and I had stepped out for one quick second to go grab something. And when I stepped out and was grabbing something, I just heard everybody start screaming. And I was like, oh, shoot, I'd have missed them. Like, good times. But anyway, all of that same joy that we had on the other end of the spectrum, the hatred and the rage was growing, right? And they were already plotting from that moment, right? Oh, good question, man. Calvin, do you think the African American millennials will have to form our own organizations to address our needs and the root causes of the moment? I'm acting like I could not read tonight. Let me try this again. Calvin, Do you think that African American millennials will have to form our own organizations to address our needs and the root causes of this moment and letter the legacy civil rights? Oh, is letting the legacy civil rights orgs die? I don't think it's that. I think what it is, and I've always said this for years, the challenge of why I think sometimes we keep repeating the same cycle is we don't, and this is everybody, I don't think we do a good job of working together cross generationally. And I think it's because every generation thinks they know best. And I think, to be fair, within the scope of how we see and experience the world, we technically do know best depending on our experience. The baby boomers are going to know best of their era in the same way that Gen Xers will know what's best coming from their perspective, the same way millennials will, Gen Z and Gen Alpha as they come up. And I think the reason I say that is the energy that I see with Gen Z right now is a lot of the energy that people in my age group just had maybe like 10, 12 years ago. But where the ball gets dropped every time is that because older generations, we also kind of stop. How do I say it? Like, all of these generations have a different experience here, right? And sometimes the different generations don't speak the same language. And because of that, there ends up being kind of like gridlock with progress. And then what ends up happening is the next step is kind of the isolation and then the beefs. So right now you start to see there's this, I don't really think it's with black folks, but I see it with the white folks, where you constantly see this millennial versus Gen Z beef. And I'm like, millennials and Gen Z were given almost the same deck of cards. There are some differences, but I don't see what they're beefing about. They kind of got the same experience in the same way like millennials and Gen X have similar experiences, but there are some things that are different. But as far as like you're saying with organizations, I think there needs to be more people who are building, organizations. This is why I try to like support, like I always talk about locally, Guns Down Friday here in DC is an organization who spends a lot of their time combating intra-community violence. But as opposed to just being an agency that reacts to something that's already taken place, they try to be very proactive and they do different things in the community. We know right now the narrative is about the teenagers that need something to do because all of these heavily gentrified cities that have built around them and made everything super expensive, where there are no third spaces or safe spaces for teenagers to go to. Now all of these cities are mad because these teenagers are running around doing Lord knows what. But a group like Guns Down Friday tries to have events for the teenagers and for the kids. They do the backpack drives. They do the political, information sessions to let people know what's happening with the mayoral race, or what's happening with this, what's happening with that. You need a lot of that going on. And I think even with that, if there was one shift that I do think has to kind of somewhat take place, is I think we need a lot more things on the local level that people support. We can still have the larger organizations and everything else like that, but really when you're talking about that direct impact where you are shaking the hand of the person you impacted, it's got to be more of it on the local level. And I think in addition to that, we also have to start supporting those who are trying to build the bigger platforms or who are trying to do the work or trying to get there. There are so many people who I think would make excellent politicians, who would be excellent. And unfortunately, they can never raise enough to get to that next threshold in their political careers because they have to compete against, the big corporate candidate that has, if I'm just talking a local level, the big corporate candidate that has $200,000 or $300,000 to play with as they run for a city council seat versus the other person who may be running for city council and they're a manager at Home Depot. And so they may not even have the best team to fundraise and get media exposure because that's not even their bailiwick. And that's why I really believe in the idea of like cross-generational connection. One of these years ago, I did a video on my concerns with protesting. And I was saying, if you were trying to get more leverage with what's happening, you'd have to work cross-generationally. Younger folks have the energy to be outside in the streets all night, all day, especially college students and those who are younger because they don't have to do 9 to 5s. And so they got the energy to go out. They got the energy to fight. They don't mind getting arrested for a misdemeanor and then coming back out on Monday, Tuesday, blah, 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 blah. People who are a little bit older but still young might not be in that same capacity to do that same action because maybe they're already into their careers, but they have the networks and they can connect you to anybody that you need to get to because for the last 10 or 15 years, they've been climbing the ranks in the workforce and they built the camaraderie with folks across, like horizontally in their different respective fields. And now they have the connections. And then the generation that's above them sits on a nice cushion of money because they come from an era where they were able to build and save just because the economy used to be a little bit better to the working class and the middle class. And so they have money and long money and connection to people that are even in more positions of power, and usually connections to people that are also in office. And then a generation above that, which I would really say are like the elders, they have the wisdom and the knowledge of what not to do because they've been here and done that. Imagine being 80 or 90 years old right now and watching all this nonsense happen. You know how pissed I'd be if I was 91 and I see that voting rights is being gutted. And indirectly, one of the reasons why is because people stopped showing up to the polls. And in the elections that mattered when it came to, electing your state legislature, I'm not talking the House and the Senate, I'm talking at the state level, your state house, right? And because they would be in these positions that would eventually elect some of the state judges and this and that. All of this was one big web. You know how pissed I would be if I was 92 and we got to go through this again? I'm supposed to be one step. Y'all are supposed to be rolling me to my 93rd birthday party and telling me how great I am. And I'm supposed to hug all the grandkids and the great grandkids. And y'all are supposed to put on a show for me like the Cosby Show. Y'all supposed to do the Ray Charles song. And then y'all supposed to give me a cake, but make sure the cake don't got too much sugar because I probably got diabetes at this point. So it's a cake with lots of fruit and stuff on the top of it. I'm probably got an attitude cussing y'all out about it. But since you made it from a place of love, I'm going to still say thank you. That's what I'm supposed to be doing at 92. Not concerned about your well-being because the work that my generation or the generation after put in is still cemented and locked in, and the generations that came after did their parts, and I can go on to glory knowing that the legacy that my generation created is still there and that the kids are going to be all right. I would be mad as hell right now if I was a senior citizen. Anyway, okay, I didn't mean to go, this almost turned to a whole nother video, but thank you for that comment. But yeah, I don't know about getting rid of organizations, but I do believe in the idea of, like you're saying, building and creating new things. And really, like I'm saying, sometimes it can be the most simple things. It doesn't have to be starting full organization. Sometimes it's just working within the capacity of what it is that you excel in. Perfect example is like my cousin Brandon's oldest daughter is 16. She's thinking of going to Howard and playing for baseball, but she's also thinking of going to other colleges as well. Cousin hits me up like, hey, my daughter's thinking about playing baseball at Howard. Do you got to connect? Well, actually, I do, because I got a classmate, Erica, who is like locked in with all things Howard. And I know if I reach out to Erica, Erica knows somebody. What did I do? I texted Erica, hey, Erica, you got a connection to the Howard softball thing. Do you know somebody? Erica was like, oh, yeah. She gave me all the information to the straight up coach, right? And then Erica was like, yeah, just send me what you need to send up from your cousin. And I got it from there. You send it all. Now, Brandy's not eligible to be in communication with the coaches yet because she's not a senior, but like the coach followed up, gave Brandon all the information that they would need to know about like different camps, different workshops, so on and so forth. That was just a text message and a call. That alone, if Brandy gets in and decides to do that, you just change that girl's life from a phone call and a text. That's how simple some of this is when we're talking about community, right? It's the same thing, like I said, with my kids. Or all of them, right? The amount of letters of recommendation that I have had to write, I get tired of writing them, but you know what? You realize that they're going to do something and they're going to open another door for somebody else, right? Like last flex, and then I'm going to shut up on this. So even with Clarissa from the podcast, like if you've been listening to Comedically Hard-Headed, we've been doing episodes about my work with the kids, and I've had to rename all the kids to protect their privacy. But when you get introduced to Clarissa, she's a first grader in the podcast. It's not there yet, but Clarissa ends up becoming just this amazing kid who ends up winning all of these like speech competitions and everything. Do you know Clarissa got me flown out to New York through her work? Mind you, she was at this point I didn't even work at the center anymore, but she had made it all the way to a national competition where she was competing against 4 other teenagers from the same organization out of, mind you, this organization has 4.6 million kids, right? She's competing against 4 other teenagers for the title of being like, kind of like a youth of America type thing. Do you know the person who introduced her when she presented her speech was Ruth Carter? The same Ruth Carter who has won 2 Academy Awards for costume design, one for Black Panther, and I forgot what the other one is for. A little girl who went to my tiny community center that only had 3 rooms in a computer lab, is now sharing the stage with Academy Award winners because people poured into her and she saw the greatness that she could be and she hopped on it. And then at that same event, Gladys Knight is sitting there. Silly me, I didn't know who Kofi Kingston was because I didn't watch wrestling. And I'm literally talking to Kofi Kingston at the reception, asking him, "Oh, well, what kid are you here for?" And I done talked this man's ear off for 10 minutes. And then they introduce him on the stage, and I'm like, "Oh, this is one of these WWE wrestlers." And I think he even laughed because when he walked past, he just kind of did that to my shoulder, like, kind of like, "Yeah, well, now you know who I am." Like that kind of stuff. All of this, when we're talking like community, you just never know what comes from the seeds that you plant, right? You plant the seeds, they're going to sprout based. I always say community is what makes the seeds sprout, right? So that's where we're going. I'm gonna get off my soapbox because all right, I'm over here rambling. Um, I know we're being serious, but Calvin, did you see your alma mater Mayor Browser's commencement speech? I didn't. I saw that she didn't get the best reception, but what was I doing? What was I doing? I think that was. I can't remember if theirs was the same time as the VCU when I went to. I can't remember. Either way, I missed it, but I don't have a lot of connection with a lot of the current Howard students just because it was like 16 years ago when I went there. So I'd have to sit and hear like from the students like what was behind the reasoning. I think I have my assumption, but I don't want to say that on here and then be loud and wrong. But yeah, I did see that she didn't get the best reception. And then Ruth Carter was so cool. Like, oh, that was the other flex, right? So Ruth Carter was so laid back and chill that we all ended up taking the same Uber back to the hotel, like because we were all in the same hotel. And then through Ruth Carter, I end up meeting Susan Taylor. If you know Susan Taylor was the original, like the editor in chief of Essence, you know, lady with the braids. Like I got Susan Taylor's number in my phone. I don't bother her out of respect, but like, all through community, right? All through connection. She was so impressed with Clarissa that, you know, once she found out, oh, you were the guy that worked with her for her whole childhood. Okay, I want to know more about you. And then I talked her ear off. She listened to the Comedically Hard-Headed podcast. I was like, okay. And then she was like, are the things you said in there true? And she asked it because, mind you, the podcast, we're talking about the very organization that's hosting the event. I'm like, yeah, that's what happened. Right? So yeah, okay. I got a few more minutes. We'll keep moving. Somebody said I need to re-listen to the podcast episodes. I'm trying to get we're in year 6 now. There's only 11 years to get through. I'm trying to make it a bit more consistent where I at least have an episode out every 2 months. So there's another one that drops in like another week and a half. And then yeah, I'm trying to just get them out a little bit faster because I think with the timing in between, I think some of them are so long as far as the wait between them that you forget who some of the people are. So I'm trying to do a better job of getting it out faster. But life is life, and y'all. Baby Love said, I'm so upset about everything that's going on in the U.S. and around the world. We have to put God first, pray, vote, always educate, fight for injustice, love on one another, bless us all. Yes, put out that good energy, right? Let's see. Haas 23 said, I remember students walking out of their HBCU graduations because of the same thing last time Trump was in office, same year I graduated. I know when I went to one of my other kids' graduation at Old Dominion in 2023, which was stressful as I don't know what, because their graduation was all the way in Norfolk, and it was the same night as the Janet Jackson concert up here. Boy, listen. Anyway, well, let me get back to Janet in a sec. But Glenn Youngkin was the commencement speaker at Old Dominion in 2023. Them students were not having, they were standing up, turning their backs, walking out. That was like good for y'all because Glenn Youngkin was a horrible person. But no, I just remember in the podcast, her name is Ashley. But Ashley had graduated from Old Dominion and the family wanted to take me out to eat. And so I was eating so fast because, mind you, the drive from Norfolk back to DC can sometimes be as long as 4 hours if traffic is crazy. So I was booking it to try to get it. Like I ate that food so fast and got back on that freeway and drove them 4 hours because I was not missing that show. So yeah, what a time. That was that first leg of the Together Again tour. All right, we got about 5 minutes and I need to get off this. It's been a good live. I apologize that we really only covered 2 topics, but one was such an extensive one that it really probably was like 6 topics in one. So what I will do is I will make sure that we have another live next week to make up for the lack of topics on this one. How about that? So we'll do that. All right, so the last few comments, get your comments in before I wind down for the night. But yeah, like I said, y'all, we're gonna be good. Everybody just needs to lock in, find out what your gift is or what it is that you can contribute. Stay alert, educate your peers. You know, if you don't have the verbiage or the know-how to express or say the things that you want to say, find the information of somebody who can. Find a media person or YouTuber or book author or whatever, or ask around, right? We only gonna learn this through like togetherness. That's why I keep talking about community and discernment. Um, Somebody said Susan Taylor is epic. You were correct. Essence Magazine original editor. Yeah, I was flabbergasted at that event because like Susan Taylor was there. Like I said, Kofi Kingston and there was another wrestler, I forgot his name, was there. Gladys Knight was there. Ashanti was there. I'm skipping so many people. And I'm like, we are in Manhattan. And mind you, I'm in New York all the time, but I don't get to go for like banquets and stuff. Normally I see that I'm doing some work stuff or, you know, I'm catching up with friends. But like this was like, oh, we're in New York because of one of our kids that is just like thriving. And they're, you know, I didn't even work in this company anymore. And they paid for my hotel. Ava got to come. Like we had us a time. I love that. Now, unfortunately, Clarissa did not win, but she did get second place, which was fine by me. I was like, it's fine. Because at that point, her college was already paid for. She had racked up so many scholarships. She got a car. She got everything. I was like, the other kid that won, I was like, let them have it. They deserve it. Good for them. Right? So there's that. Did I hear Rep Justin Pearson's speech? I have not heard his speech if he had a speech today, but I did see that clip of him chewing out that police officer that was trying to manhandle him. I was like, see, that's the Justin Pearson that I would know because I used to always be like, he was kind of blowing me a little bit when he would kind of speak with that same like Martin Luther King-esque delivery with the vocal inflections. And I'm like, I want you to just be yourself. Please, it'll help. So when that officer did that, whatever, he says, the boy, I was like, yes. Oh, I loved every minute of that. I'm gonna go look up the speech, so I haven't seen it though. But yeah. And somebody said again, a way to model send Kofi, young man. Yes, we love that. Yes, Old Dominion is a PWI. Yes. Somebody said, "Oh yes, a part 2 week for all the topics we missed." Yeah, because remember that one live we were doing when I was covering Sherry Shepherd, and then the live just turned off. I had to make a whole second one. It's almost like that, but at least it'll be. It won't be spur of the moment. It'll be thought out. But yeah. Oh, but going back to the HBCU comment about students walking out, it's kind of like remember when was that Betsy DeVos? Remember she was at that HBCU and they thought it was gonna go well, and them students were not having it with her. I'm like, this woman is literally trying to dismantle education, and y'all invited her. I get trying to not piss off Orange Man and trying to stay as safe as possible, but come on. Them students were not having it with her. And then the guy, I think he was the president of the university, got mad. He's like, if you guys don't continue, we're gonna mail you your diplomas. I was like, y'all do that anyway. Like, you said that like it was a punishment, but okay. Oh, it was Bethune-Cookman? Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. I actually like that school, so I won't say nothing crazy. But yeah, somebody said it's an Old Dominion HBCU. Why would you even have Glen? No, it's not an HBCU, but they do have a really large Black population. The schools in that area that are HBCUs are like Norfolk State, Hampton. Those two are like right there because all those schools are right in that same area, which I love because I got a lot of kids that are there. So normally, if I'm visiting one, you can visit all of them. Like, all right, everybody get together. We go meet for dinner or something. All right. So yeah. Okay, this has been good. I need to get off this. I need to go to bed. And yeah, there's a lot going on. I'm going to try to do a better job of being a little bit more in real time. Y'all know I don't like being the person to break news because news is always changing. So I try to make sure I got all my stats before I start reporting on stuff. But I do want to make sure I'm not leaving y'all stranded too long. But to be fair, I wasn't here. I went to visit my mama. So blame her. No, I was kidding. Anyway, hope you guys had a happy Mother's Day. Stay safe, stay sane, mind your business so that you can age well. And we'll see you on the next live, guys. Good night.